When did a moron decide, I know better than my doctor? Working at a supplement store years ago, I had a woman come in asking about vitamin B17. She said her daughter had a terminal illness, and she was taking her off chemo despite her doctors pleading with her not to. Some so-called friend of hers claimed B17 was a miracle vitamin that they don't want you to know about and can cure just about anything, unquote. I told her she should listen to her doctors. She told me to F off. For those of you who don't know, vitamin B17 isn't a vitamin, it's a compound called amygdalin, and eating it will give you cyanide poisoning. I'm a nurse. My patients' family members were telling everyone that the doctor was an idiot because, and I quote, "What the frick do the kidneys have to do with the bladder?" An old man I knew always had a band-aid on his nose. He had a cancerous growth on it and would cut it off himself. He'd always say, "All the doc will do is cut it off. I can do that myself and save $200. Guess who died when the cancer spread elsewhere? About 15 years ago, before the whole gluten-free trend, I worked with a guy who was a vegetarian. We worked side by side, just the two of us, and got along really well. One day I got curious and asked what led to his vegetarianism. He told me he had been having some health problems and went to see the doctor. The doctor ran some tests and told my friend that he should cut wheat out of his diet. This guy says, "Well, that doesn't sound right. He must have meant meat instead of wheat." A friend of mine had stage 4 cancer. She went through chemo for over a year, and they told her that they'd let her take a break. Well, then they looked at the cancer. It hadn't shrunk as much as they'd have liked, so they told her she couldn't take a break. She started posting on Facebook about these organic green juice cleanses that someone had messaged her about. I was at her bedside, begging her to keep doing the chemo. I told her that she could do the juice cleanses if she thought they'd help, but not to stop the chemo. She responded, "But they won't work if I don't stop the chemo. That's poison in your body. I know my body, and it's going to heal it." She wound up entering hospice on her 30th birthday and passing about a month later. I'd love to find who peddled that bullcrap to her and punch them right in their frickin' mouth. I know my body. The tragic words often uttered before people make disastrous medical decisions against the advice of professionals. Look, there's a degree to which maybe that statement is true, but I want you all to know that I read these words about as frequently in stories of preventable medical disasters as I read, "Let me speak to the manager," in stories of awful people who get thrown out of retail stores. All I'm saying is there's correlation between that statement and causing your own death. I had some parents trip out when their kid with a sore throat was later found to also have an ear infection. How did he come in with one infection and end up with another? They went on and on about the terrible food we serve and how dirty the hospital must be, not realizing an infection in the throat has a direct pathway to reach the ear. I met someone who insists that insulin makes their blood sugar get higher, so they don't take it. They also don't take to having all of their toes or apparently the whole left foot, but hey, live and let die. Here's your daily kick to the rubber parts. My father was a stubborn jerk and was adamant about not following doctor's orders. Longtime smoker, drinker, so dear old dad goes in and has a mole excised from his Johnson. Uh-oh. Biopsy comes back and it's not malignant. Great problem. He didn't follow the doctor's orders on how to take care of it after the fact. Gangrene. Yep, they lopped it off. I only found out about it in my late teens. It was a mind-shattering reveal from my mother and older sister. When I was in 7th grade, I hurt my pinky playing softball. But my dad, being the assistant coach that he is, told me I just jammed it. I told him I think I did more than that since my finger was completely numb yet in excruciating pain. Like I picked up the softball after it happened and it felt like there was a hole in the ball where my finger was supposed to be. Disregarding everything I was sobbing to him, he decided to pull my finger since it was jammed. For the next couple of months, I continued to play softball, thank God for Icy Hot and Advil, where my dad said maybe it wasn't jammed since it still hurt. "You probably got a bone bruise, son." Eventually, my finger also developed a very solid bump on the side of my joint, which is still there to this day, and the pain had not gone away. When softball season ended, we finally went to the doctor and had x-rays taken. When my doctor saw them, he was amazed I still played since my bone was completely shattered into at least 6 pieces. He said he couldn't give an exact number because of the healing and the angles of the x-rays. The bump on my finger was a calcium buildup from the healing, which could have been avoided if I'd gone to the doctors when it happened. The only good thing was that I didn't need to have my finger rebroken to fix the placement of any of the fragments, since my dad pulled it initially. Gotta love coach dads, huh? Most recently had a teen patient who lost speech for a couple of days. They got better, and when I saw them again with their mum, I went over the tests we'd done and started discussing some of the possible causes. Mum interrupted me and said, "Don't say anything else. I'm a firm believer that if you don't tell someone their diagnosis, they'll just heal on their own." Literally didn't want me to tell her anything because she thought saying words out loud would give her kid a disease. Oh, same day I had a lady tell me that she was refusing treatment because she read a study where a guy treated hundreds and hundreds of patients with normal saline and had a 100% success rate. Yeah, okay, lady. My sister refused a surgery that would have removed her uterus, cervix, and part of her bowel or bladder, I forget which, thus getting rid of her cervical cancer because what man would love me this way? She left behind 4 kids under the age of 18, the youngest being 4. For those inquiring about my sister, she was unmarried. She would have needed a colostomy or urostomy, thus the whole man loving me thing was a body image issue. The kids all have homes and are doing well. The oldest has 2 kids of his own. This happened 8 years ago, and I did blame her at the time, but my anger has softened. I manage social media for a public health agency. All of our immunization and vaccine-related posts have been getting swarmed by anti-vaxxers lately. No medical training and anecdotal evidence or cherry-picked data means that apparently they know better than science. They've branched out to hit some of our other posts now too, like breastfeeding promotion, cancer, HPV. It's getting to the point where I just want to give up, which I guess is their goal because they certainly aren't going to sway anyone with their dozens of long-winded comments on a single post. A group of parents attempting to treat autism with bleach enemas. Last I checked, they're still trying. To all of you telling me to get off my butt and take action, I don't personally know who these people are, nor do I really know how to find them. Nor would I be able to do anything since, last I checked, they usually use anonymous forums to communicate. I learned about them in a widely read Vice expose. I had a patient with stage 2 bladder cancer, a young man in his 40s. He needed to have his bladder removed, but he didn't want to have that happen. Instead, he had the medicinal healer at the commune he lived in do some herbal therapies and dietary adjustment. He was dead within a year from a fairly curable disease. I've had other patients go to Mexico for non-FDA-approved treatments. They don't usually do very well, and they usually regret it. This story is far from uncommon, and I have to bite my tongue when I see them back with much worse diseases. A family with 7 kids. The oldest was barely 18 and the youngest was 2. Their father died of cancer, didn't do chemo or anything. Then their mother got cancer and decided essential oils would cure all of it. Left all of the kids behind to basically be raised by their sister or split up. A friend of mine sees way too many of these cases on a daily basis, but the worst one so far has to be a lady who gave birth way too early, so her kid was rather small to begin with. The doctors do their usual thing, give advice on childcare and everything. She comes back a week later saying her kid was sick and not sure why. My friend was appalled to find out that her baby had barely put on any weight since birth and immediately asked her what in the world she'd been feeding the kid. The woman says, "Oh, I figured since he was so tiny he didn't need to eat much, so I've been sticking to about an ounce of milk per meal." Seriously, woman. I don't know how the child's doing now, but I can only hope he's well. My mother believes that if you make food from scratch, then it's healthier for you. For instance, she thinks that making a chocolate cake from scratch, including milling her own flour, is a healthier alternative to a store-bought cake with identical ingredients. She's diabetic. Her doctors have said in as many ways as I can think of that she has to reduce her carb intake, and what my mother thinks is, gosh, maybe I should grow the sugarcane myself instead of buying sugar at the store, and my blood work will finally be in the normal range. Her liver and pancreas have failed multiple times. Each time, the doctors managed to restore organ function by restricting her carb intake. They explain that she has to continue to follow a low-carb diet at home. She does not, because she's convinced that she's already on a healthy diet. Rinse and repeat. My absolute God. Look, the extent to which she's correct is at least that she's removing a lot of hyper-processed foods and preservatives from her diet, but that is literally not what the doctor is asking for. No carbs means no carbs, not homegrown carbs. My friend is treating her Lyme disease by going to a chiropractor, using essential oils, and getting massages, apparently against her doctor's advice. Better than what happened to my mum. She got Lyme disease and saw a so-called specialist who convinced her the infection was now chronic, and she took antibiotics for like 3 years. After the first year, her symptoms changed and she asked the doctor what was going on, and he said, "Oh, I guess you must have a co-infection," and put her on more antibiotics. After 3 years of this, she was hospitalized for pulmonary embolism, and it turned out she actually had stage 4 lung cancer. She died 9 months later. Oh, also the doctor convinced her that the entire family also got Lyme disease, and I took the stupid pills for 6 months before I realized it was a crock of crap. Screw that guy. I'm still angry that my dad refused to sue him for malpractice. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My mum tans and tanning beds constantly to the point where she looks like the outside of a baked potato. I told her one day she should stop because she could get skin cancer, and she told me that's not possible with tanning beds. My brother's buddy at birth needed a blood transfusion. Without it, he would have died. His religious mother refused on religious grounds. I can't recall exactly what denomination it was, but transfusions were a no-go. Luckily, his dad was around to nip that crap in the bud, and he grew up to be an excellent RN. His mum also divorced his dad and took custody. Worked for an ophthalmologist and had 2 distinct idiots that fit into this category. The first one claimed she no longer had glaucoma, she'd prayed it away. Her intensive outpatient treatment begged to differ. The other was scheduled for cataract surgery, and he came in for his pre-op appointment only to tell us he'd spoken with God and God told him he didn't need surgery. I told the doctor and she said, "Sure, cancel it. I don't feel like arguing with God today." Doctor gave former manager some antihistamines, but she didn't make them because she didn't believe it would work, and instead she got opiates because it made her feel better, so the doctor didn't know what they were talking about, then complained symptoms kept getting worse. That woman is now working for the city I used to live in. I've gotten a few questions, so she technically broke the law with the help of a crappy doctor to get them. That's also why I brought up the working for the city part. I teach people on a daily basis how to use urinary catheters. You aren't supposed to reuse them, you just use it once and throw it away. And when you need to catheterize again, you open a new one. That's because using a non-sterile catheter can cause urinary tract infections and a host of all other kinds of problems. The doctor will send us a script for how many per day the patients need to use, and every single day, without fail, I'll have at least 1 or 2 tell me that their doctor is wrong and they only need 1 per day because they'll just wash it off and reuse it. No, it literally says on the packaging not to do that. Your doctor said not to do that. I'm telling you not to do that. Why do you still think it's okay to do that? I saw this on the news in Alabama a few years ago. A child got bitten by a timber rattlesnake. The mother said 911 wasn't necessary because she had a home remedy that her grandma had passed down, and all the child needed was to drink the remedy, take some ibuprofen, and lay down for a few hours and she'd be good as new. The child barely survived, the mother lost all 3 of her children and was charged with felony neglect and endangering a child. I lived in Alabama for a while and a lady swore to me that since her dog had been bitten by a copperhead once already, he was immune to snake bites now. If I didn't know she only had 2 kids, I'd swear this was her. My friend was a bodybuilder, suffered a heart attack at a young age due to the effed up status quo of the sport, and was ordered not to work out. He responded by finding a gym out of town and working out there. He had another heart attack while at that gym and never regained consciousness. I don't think he was arrogant, just very concerned about how he looked, but he left a very, very sad wife behind in addition to a huge group of friends, because he was sweet as a big, swole meathead could possibly be. And when I met him in school, he was a little kid in need of a place to hide out from his insane home life. So he was our little baby, even though he ended up having 100 pounds more muscle than the rest of us. I don't know why I'm writing this, but I loved him and writing feels better than not writing. Please take care of yourselves and don't let anything so preventable happen to you. Get your checkups, my swole friends of the internet. And if the doctor says you need to make a change, do something like directing that drive into something like running, and be an impressive beanpole instead. There are too many people who care about you for your muscles to be your main priority. This couple I knew that was super into fitness. Husband gets pneumonia. They decide the best treatment is specially formulated meal plans and vitamin shots. He died in his wife's arms in the middle of the night. My brother-in-law has chronic back pain and regularly goes to a chiropractor for it, and apparently said chiropractor also works on his neck. After 1 chiropractor appointment, my brother-in-law experienced severe weakness to the point where he could hardly get out of bed. At one point, apparently, he collapsed and had slurred speech. I, an RN, was like, "Guy, get to the hospital because that sounds like a stroke." At the time of this conversation, I was also hanging out with another nurse who used to work in neurology, and she agreed he should go to a doctor ASAP. He was like, "Nah, my chiropractor's a doctor, and he knew about it and said it would go away." He's very much an alt health kind of guy and thinks stuff like vitamins and coconut oil will cure anything. I also remember looking after this one guy who came in post-myocardial infarction from the cath lab. His blood pressure was sky high. The patient denied any major health issues in the past, and he only took supplements. I called the doctor about his blood pressure, and the doctor ordered some antihypertensive pills. Before the patient took them, he ranted about Big Pharma and how meds don't work and that if he was just allowed to go home to take his usual herbs or whatever, he'd be fine. Judging by the fact that his blood pressure refused to come down after the pills and required an IV nitroglycerin infusion, his ECG showed signs of left ventricular hypertrophy, typically caused by high blood pressure over time. And the fact that he had a massive heart attack showed me that his heart problems had been brewing for a while, and as expected, his herbal supplement was doing squat. My dad had a heart attack and went to the emergency room. While he was there, he coded 8 times. His heart stopped and he had to be revived each of those. He survived and they admitted him. He had a lot of damage. After a couple of weeks, he checked himself out because those goddamn buttholes don't know what the frick they're talking about. He was found dead of heart failure about 3 weeks later. A young, bubbly mother I know was diagnosed with chest cancer. Tried alternative meds as promoted by her flaky girlfriends. Eventually, she returned to the doctor who told her it was too advanced to do anything. She died, leaving a little boy for her husband and extended family to care for. I still believe her friends contributed to her premature death. Not my doctor, but my mum's. My mother had a heart attack February of 2017. She was prescribed a couple of medications such as beta blockers, stuff like that. And my aunt, who's against vaccinations, prescribed medications and anything non-organic, tried to not only tell my mum the medications she was prescribed were the wrong ones, per a quick 10-minute Wikipedia search, but also that my mum's heart attack must 100% have been health-related, despite multiple tests and the doctor telling her it was simply stress-induced. I'd also like to add that we called my aunt immediately after the ambulance arrived to take my mum to the hospital, and she said she wasn't going to make the 40-minute trip to the hospital unless it was serious. She's also done the same "I know better than anyone" bit in other health-related situations, and she's the kind of person you can't disagree with because the conversation will go nowhere. Very aggravating to say the least. While talking with my OB and asking a ton of questions about my pregnancy, he told me a story. He was the on-call doctor for a hospital and goes in after shift changes from another on-call doc. The woman's been actively pushing for 3 hours. She's refused a C-section multiple times because she's certain she can have the baby naturally. Turns out the baby was stuck and pushing caused major damage to her. My doc tried to persuade her, but she continued to refuse. Without being too graphic, things did not go well. Women often have this overwhelming expectation of how their labor and birth is going to go, avoiding C-section and meds like the plague. The reality is those things have saved many lives. Probably me. I've talked about this before, but I'll share again as a sort of PSA. I was addicted to a medication called Mercindol, which contained a relaxant plus codeine plus paracetamol. It started at 2 tablets a day, then 4, then 8. After a couple of years, I was taking more than 40 pills a day. I thought all the warnings about don't take more than 8 a day were stupid. I was all, I take 40 a day, so I'm fine. I went to hospital for an unrelated issue with my eye, and they freaked out about how much paracetamol was in my system. I lied and said I took heaps due to pain in my eye. They tested my liver and it was inexplicably fine. From there I realized just how close I was coming to death daily. I'd built up a major tolerance, but generally 40 paracetamol is enough to kill 2 people. It's insanely lethal. It took me another year to give it up, and I've researched it a lot now. People think Panadol or Tylenol is harmless. It's not. People take heaps, wake up fine, and think they're safe. In reality, the symptoms of taking too much don't appear until you're literally dying and there's nothing they can do to save you. You have a 24-hour window to have your life saved. Even if you build up a tolerance, it doesn't mean you're safe. I'm the exception to the rule. In short, I was addicted to a substance that contained paracetamol. I thought warnings on the packet were stupid. They're not. Tylenol or Panadol or paracetamol or whatever name you know it as, it's insanely lethal. Read the packet instructions and don't deviate. You're not a doctor. I want to add that paracetamol is called acetaminophen in the US. Also, I should say that I'm 3.5 years clean. Saying clean sounds weird because I've always been so anti-substance. I don't even like green herb much. Legal medicine can sort of blindside you. It caught me so off guard. It started as, what does it hurt for me to take a couple to get to sleep? But then the more I took, the less they worked as my tolerance got harder. I fell in love with them basically, then taught myself to fall out of love. Stay safe, folks.
What's your most accidental, awesome moment? So, in my first years in high school, there was this bully that always picked on me, pushing me around, swearing, and other bullying stuff. Me being the bespectacled little geek and him being taller and bulkier, I just tried to get out of his way and avoid him. So in our second year, our school went for a field trip in some village/farm area. As soon as we were far from teachers, this bully shows up, pushes me around, and hits me. I was fuming because he spoiled my trip, but didn't do anything and he left. A few hours later, I was having lunch up on a small hill that was overlooking a small amateur soccer field. And there was the bully, back to me, 20 meters away, playing as goalkeeper. Geek rage flares up. I have this apple with me, so I pick it up and throw it with all my might towards him. It hit him, straight on the shoulder blade. Now my added height and distance must have added to the force of impact because he got knocked down hard. He lay there for a good 5 minutes, got up, turned around, looked at me, and started walking slowly towards me. I was thinking, oh crap, he's gonna kill me. But I had the geek rage still flaring, so I stood defiantly and waited, ready to fight back this time. He reaches me and goes, "What was that?" "An apple." Listen, man, I don't want any trouble. I was dumbfounded. He never bothered me again after that, even became a bit friendly. TLDR, I neutralized a bully with geek rage and an apple. I was sitting on a patio with friends, and a friend who was absolutely terrified of roaches started screaming and running around because a roach appeared on the top of the patio about 25 feet away from me. As a joke, I casually stood up, whipped out my pocket knife, and while talking, I threw it. It went spinning through the air and stuck the roach to the wood. I sat back down and finished what I was saying while everyone was in disbelief. We all had a good laugh, and they nicknamed me Crocodile Dundee. I catch rattlesnakes for a living in Phoenix, Arizona as an emergency response service for people who find a snake in their yard. Most calls are diamondbacks, but 1 in 4 or so, quote, rattlesnakes end up being a large constrictor called a gopher snake. Gopher snakes can be aggressive, but they're otherwise harmless. On one call, there was a kid of about 15 who was absolutely terrified of a rattlesnake he saw along the back wall of his yard, behind the swimming pool. The only way to really get there was to tightrope it across the narrow ledge of the pool. I got there and saw that it wasn't a rattlesnake at all, but a harmless gopher snake. So I reached down and grabbed the 5-foot snake. It was a jerk about the whole thing, striking at my face repeatedly and getting me on the forearm. I grabbed it closer to the head and wrestled it into control as I made my way back across the ledge to the bucket, where I unwrapped him from my arm and body and put it in the bucket. I then realized I forgot to tell the kid that it wasn't a rattlesnake before doing that. I looked up and he looked like he was going to vomit/pass out. Probably the palest I've ever seen a living person. He surely believed he was about to see a man die. I now routinely, quote, forget to tell homeowners that it's just a gopher snake. About 15 years ago, my ex-wife and I were at a party sitting across from each other at a fairly large table. We were surrounded by dozens of friends. Some sitting, some standing and chatting in the kitchen. She had my Zippo and I wanted to smoke, so I asked her to toss it to me. She tossed the Zippo to me across the table. The lid pops open in midair. Somehow, I hit the roller with my thumb as I catch it, and the thing lights up as it hits my hand. My arm is fully outstretched when I catch it, so I smoothly pulled my arm in, lit the cigarette in my mouth, snapped the Zippo shut with a flick of my wrist, and tossed it back to her with one fluid motion. Half the people at the table jump up in amazement and begged us over and over again to perform the trick one more time. We refused. I never told a soul that the whole event was completely accidental. My friends still talk about it with awe. Not nearly as awesome as yours. I was with my girlfriend at a party and she had this crazy look in her eye from across the table. I could tell she was going to spit a Skittle at me. I didn't know how I knew. She launched it across the long table and I caught it in my mouth. Nobody noticed. For this next one, as I describe this, I just want you to imagine Ave Maria playing in your head. I was at a college football game for MSU in Missouri. I was up in the nosebleeds after our marching band had played in the homecoming parade earlier that day. I left to go get concessions and started walking down the stairs. I tripped suddenly and began tumbling over and over, down, down, down. Over stairs, across landings, flailing hopelessly for purchase on one of the handrails or an onlooker's appendage, but with no avail. It seemed to never end. I eventually reached the bottom, where the landing divided left and right to lead the mezzanine, which meant there was a bit of concrete and a handrail directly in front of me. I hit the handrail with my lower back, almost fully upside down, and still locked in the kinetic tour de force of my fall. I rocked over the handrail with my lumbar as my fulcrum, dropped the meter or so to the ground, and landed feet first in such a state of confusion that I just started walking as if nothing had happened. The whole section erupted in cheers, to the point it made people on the field look up at us. TLDR, I took an epic fall down a crap ton of stairs in front of thousands, landed on my feet, and everyone thought it was on purpose. When I was about 11 years old, I got chased by two vicious, hungry-looking Dobermans in a car yard. Realized I wasn't going to get away, so I turned around, put my war face on, and bolted straight at them, shouting like I was possessed and intending to tear their freaking snouts off. Dogs disappeared with their tails between their legs. I felt like a big man. Now let me see your war face! Ah! I worked at a Boy Scout camp years and years ago. One of the activities I was in charge of was building a log cabin. Part of building the log cabin is to strip all the bark off the wood to help keep the logs from rotting. The Scouts generally had a love-hate relationship with this step of the project. On the plus side, they got to use sharp objects. On the minus side, it was hard manual labor. While they were using bark strippers, I was using a chisel to get the bark off around knots. Normally, using a chisel on wood is not a hazardous operation as long as the blade is facing away from you. One day, I was not doing well on my safety observance. I was trying to jam a stubborn piece of bark off the wood with the blade facing toward my arm. The wood broke against the force. The blade kept on trucking through the bark and into my wrist. At this point, the Scouts knew something was wrong as they saw me curse, drop the chisel, and grab my arm. I was the only adult present, so I was fighting to keep my calm as to not panic the Scouts. My solution was to turn it into a first aid lesson. I told a couple of Scouts to get the first aid kit and the others to help me over the picnic bench. I told them they were going to have an impromptu first aid lesson on severe bleeding and shock with the victim as their instructor. The Scouts were able to keep their heads together and get the health officer out to our location to treat me the rest of the way. They said it was the best first aid class they ever had. Oh, maybe junior year of high school. I used to stay after school to avoid going home. Some girl 1 year below me came up to me with her friends, acting flirty. Her girlfriend and 3 guys walked away. I did not think much of it at the time. Fast forward about 30 minutes, and the girl that I was talking to said that she was worried about her friend and why she was still gone. She said that her friend went in the auditorium and asked if I would see if she is still there. I walk into the auditorium and all the lights are off except for the band pit. I make my way down there and hear a girl say, "No, let go." I flipped a bit and mustered up a yell while charging the band pit. 3 guys take off, followed by the girls. About a month later, my dean walks into my classroom and says that she needs to escort me to the principal's office. Mind you, my school was huge, so while walking to the other building where the principal's office was located, I asked if this was about my skipping gym class a bunch of times. She said no, but whatever it was about must be really big to warrant her escorting me to the principal. We get to the office and I see 2 cops and the 2 girls that I met a month before. Freaking the heck out, I sit down and the cops say, "Thank you." What? I was asked some questions and was informed that the 3 guys were attempting to force themselves upon the girl. I guess I stumbled in at the right time. I had not spoken to my father for months at this time in my life, but received a call from him that night. The school called to tell him what I had done. My pops told me I was his hero. That was a good day. Once in middle school, my locker was next to some hot chicks. I noticed one of her books started slipping from the top shelf, so I put my hand out to stop it. It started actually falling, so I was like, crap, and awkwardly tried to stop it. It landed perfectly in my hand. The binding went straight into my palm, without me even looking, and I ninja'd it right back into the shelf. I was Peter Parker for 30 seconds. I was going to college in Chicago and left a bar near Wrigley Field with a beer bottle in my hand. While walking to the L, 2 guys confront me on the street wanting to rob me. I was stunned and accidentally hit the bottle on a brick building, shattering the bottom. The 2 guys thought I was going to defend myself with the broken bottle and ran. stopped to get gas at an old country store gas station outside Camden, South Carolina. Apparently, one of the door hinges was broken, so when I opened the door, the entire door came off in my hands. There were 5 or 6 farmers, truckers in line at the cashier. One of the fellas said, "Dang, I'd feel pretty good for the rest of the day if I were you." Here's another story. When I was in grade 10, I had this real jerk of a computer science teacher. Like, the type that would rather make fun or condescend you to make himself feel better or something instead of helping you. One day, we were making programs to output certain properties of a sphere/circle after inputting a radius value. I remember asking him what's the surface area of a sphere or something to that effect. I mean, I don't think that was an unreasonable question. I'm in frickin' 10th grade for frick's sake. He decided to take this opportunity to humiliate me. So anyway, this is how the convo went. The surface area of a sphere is 4 pi r squared, right, sir? Did you just ask me the surface area of a sphere? Yeah? Well, maybe we should call your math teacher and find out. Walks over to phone, dials math teacher. Hey, your student X would like to ask you a question. I walk over to phone with everyone in class watching me. Yeah, Mr. Computer Science teacher doesn't know the surface area of a sphere, and he's too embarrassed to ask you himself. His face turned super red and the whole class cracked up. I felt so epic that week. Me and my then 3-year-old son went to the playground. This bigger kid arrived and started going around scaring the crap out of the smaller kids by popping out and roaring and hissing and whatnot right in their face. I saw what car came in and that his mom was sitting in it still, maybe just waiting for him to finish quote-unquote playing. Anyway, he proceeds to do his scare thing to my son, who of course freaks out and runs to me crying. I started fuming, thinking it's his own parent's responsibility to tell him to cut that crap out. I decided to go tell his mom. I ask, "Is that your son over there?" She says yes, and I tell her what he's doing, and either you get him to stop or I'll do it for you. To my surprise, she says, "Oh, please do. I can't control him today." So I go back over and try my best to hide right where he is roaming. And as soon as he's within striking distance, I pop out, and with all the air in my lungs, I scream at the top of my lungs 1 inch from his face. He ran back to his car, absolutely terrified and crying. I could see his mom. She didn't come out or do a thing. To this day, if anyone messes with my son who's bigger than him, he screams nonsensically in their face. Crazy beats size any day. Was in a restaurant with my girlfriend at the time, and when a guy built like a refrigerator just comes barging through and knocks my girlfriend's drink all over her. Sorry, real quick, I just need to mention that I could not tell you how many times I cracked up over the phrase built like a refrigerator. Like, that's such a specific thing to say, and it just murdered me every time I tried to read it. It was clearly an accident based on his refrigerator-like physique and being unable to hold his arms at his side. At this point, I'm standing up to help clean her up and figure he's going to apologize or something. Instead, he pushes my shoulder and tells me to get out of the way and, quote, let the dog clean herself up. I stare at him and say, "That dog is my girlfriend. You dang well better apologize to her." So the woman and man at the table next to us are notably getting nervous. She drops her menu off the table. By some fluke, I catch the menu flat along the top of my foot before it hits the ground and proceed to just raise my foot, keeping the menu on top of it. I grab the menu into my hand, all the while glaring into this guy's eyes. I just tell her, "Sorry, ma'am, you seem to have dropped this." I just look at him and say, "So, I think we left it off where you were going to apologize to my girlfriend for being so rude and then walking around." Much to my surprise, he turned to my girlfriend and said, "I'm terribly sorry," and then turned around and walked away. Our check was taken care of as well. I've caught light things like pieces of paper on top of my foot, but never something like a menu. And I was always terrible at hacky sack. I was 19 and at a house party near the university in my hometown. It was winter and my girlfriend and I were wearing scarves she had just knitted. They were her first knitting projects and she was super proud of them. I was super proud too. Anyway, there were a group of snarky jocks sitting on the steps and on the railing of the porch. We were returning from a beer run, and as I approached the door, one of the jocks on the railing says to me, "Nice scarf, gay boy," and all his buddies laugh. I stood there with the door in my hand for a second and looked at my visibly hurt girlfriend. It made me furious that he mocked her amazing creation and gift, so I slammed the door and started towards them to tell them how actually freaking awesome my scarf was. He must have thought I was in fight mode because he flinched, lost balance, tried to correct himself, and comically fell backwards off the porch to the delight of both his and my friends. I opened the door for my beaming girlfriend and we went inside. Best part is, no one knew all I was going to do was get all sentimental on his butt and open up a can of polite confrontation all over him. TLDR, guy smack-talked my woman's yarn crafts and now he's on his back. TLDR, accidental front flip on a snowboard. I'm a little late to the game, but here it goes. I used to work at a ski resort in Pennsylvania, so I'd be out riding in all kinds of crazy conditions. One particular day, the snow was really granulated to the point where you could get stuck in it. I was riding down a steep slope going quite fast and hit a pile of granulated snow that almost brought me to a complete stop. My reflexes told me to lean forward and tuck, so instead of a devastating fall, I was picked up off the ground by my momentum and did a front flip on my board, landing perfectly and riding away. I think one or two other instructors saw it. I was about 17 when I was walking with my younger brother and two of his friends. They were all about 12. A car, full of people, passes and yells at us and flips us off. I knew who it was, so I flipped them off and yelled, "Screw you!" back at them. We continued along and cut through an empty parking lot enclosed by trees to take a shortcut to our destination. The car I flipped off comes flying into the parking lot, people screaming, tires squealing. My little brother and his friends are scared crapless. I walk over to the car laughing because of the way the younger kids with me were acting, and was going to give my friends in the car a good laugh. When I get to the car, I stick my head dang near in the driver's window, still laughing, and realized I had no idea who any of these people were. My laughing face turned to a morbid, "I'm about to get my butt kicked" face, which the people in the car must have interpreted as maniacal laughter turning into a death stare. It scared the crap out of them, and I recall hearing passengers screaming at the driver to get the heck out of there. "He's going to kill us!" The car peeled away, and I walked back to rejoin my brother and his friends, and they all thought I was the coolest, most awesome older teen they'd ever met. About 5 years ago, there was a crazy huge bee in my house, and my brother, terrified of bees, came running to me, wanting me to kill it for him. I picked up my crappy toy airsoft pistol, which was loaded with one pellet, pointed the pistol at the bee from about 40 feet away, didn't aim at all, pulled the trigger, and saw a splat on the other side of the room. TLDR, unassisted triple play. I hate baseball. No offense. My mom made me play in the park league a few seasons anyways. So I was at second base in a coach pitch game, about 8 years old, when the batter hit a ball that would have passed right by me at shoulder level. I just casually stuck on my glove and to my surprise caught the ball. I was already stepping on the base, so the runner heading towards third was instantly out. By this time, the runner from first was approaching. "Tag him!" my coach was screaming frantically. So I reached out and tapped the runner from first. I remember everyone, especially the coach, going wild. They even dated the ball and gave it to me. I didn't realize until years later how rare an unassisted triple play is. This happened in my skydiving years. It was a Saturday morning. There was a group of girls from the nearby college wanting to jump, so the daring, including myself, wanted to do a hop and pop to show the girls what skydiving looks like. We get to altitude, jump, deploy our chutes, and start to show off our crazy canopy skills. I decide that I'll do a hook turn. They look cool from the ground, and my canopy colors were blue and pink. Well, after some tugs on my toggles, my hook turn collapses my canopy. It turns into a low hook turn. Low hook turns usually end up with a visit to the hospital or the morgue, usually the latter. With my canopy folded over, I'm doing revolutions. My altitude is too low to cut away and use my reserve, so I think to myself that, this is it. I hope this doesn't hurt too bad. I hope I can walk away. On the bright side, my lines didn't wrap around the canopy, so there is a possibility that I could pull it out before impact. From the people on the ground, all they saw were some skydivers coming in for a landing, swinging like a pendulum, and some of them coming in to kick this inflatable target we had at our DZ. They could tell that something wasn't right with one of the divers, me, because his chute wasn't open and he was spinning parallel to the ground. The most important thing to do in skydiving is to make everything you do look cool. With 100 feet to go before impact, I pump my toggles, release, and my canopy unfurls and inflates as if the hands of God raked his fingers through my lines and pulled my canopy tight. This put my body positioned perpendicular with no inches to spare for a walk-in landing. The crowd applauds with oohs and ahs, including the experienced divers who knew what was happening. I bow, gather my stuff, and go in the clubhouse to calm my nerves. My buddies told the students he does that all the time, and they knew I was shaken. I met my old dive buddies a few months ago. We live in different states now, and they brought up that experience as one of the craziest things they have ever seen. Doctors of Reddit, what is your most, oh my god, what is that moment while treating a patient? Content warning, literally all of these are disgusting. Like seriously, if you don't have a strong stomach or are easily squeamish, do not listen to or watch this video. With that being said, let's move on to the video. Well, I'm not a doctor yet, but here's a story from one of my professors. This was in rural Alabama. This middle-aged married couple had presented to the ER after they had been drinking for almost the entirety of the evening and got into a heated argument. Things got heated, and the woman eventually fell off the porch of their trailer into the shrubs a few feet below. The husband, in his drunken state, suddenly dropped the argument and came to his wife's aid. She didn't suffer anything too serious, just a couple scratches here and there, except for what the man said looked like a piece of glass or pipe or something that became lodged in the woman's arm when she hit the ground. He decided to not come to the hospital because he could remove this object himself. He got his largest pair of pliers and gripped onto this glass/pipe-looking thing lodged in his helpless wife's arm. He clamped down and pulled, cranked and cranked, trying to remove this object, and it wouldn't budge. With his masculinity defeated and the alcohol wearing off on both of them, they decided it's sensible to finally come to the ER. Upon arriving to the ER, the doctor immediately realized this poor woman had a compound fracture of her humerus, and this, quote, pipe or piece of glass thing was her bones sticking through her skin that her husband was trying to pry out with a pair of pliers. True story. Yeah, for anyone who's played Far Cry 2, those healing animations are what not to do in a situation where you break your bones. Content warning, this one's really gross. OBGYN rotations. I was delivering my first baby. It was an older lady from the rural side of town. When I asked her to push as the baby had fully crowned, a wad of worms exited her anus. I'm talking at least 60 live worms. I gagged so hard, but managed to keep a straight face throughout and deliver the baby. I realized then and there that OBGYN was not for me. Oh my god! That's enough internet for today! I am a surgery resident. I once helped operate on a man whose face was chewed off by a bear. I had to find little scraps of skin at the edges of the hole in the middle of his face and tried to decide where they went to try and make the damage smaller. I also saw a patient come to the emergency department with a Barbie in their rectum. He apparently puts the arms up and legs down like a diving position, rubber bands the arms together, then places it in his rectum for a time. When he wants it out, he takes laxatives, only this time, it got stuck. The kicker? When we removed it, he asked for it back. Number 1. Maggots on a gangrenous foot. Both times, I almost lost my lunch. The worst part was that the second time I knew exactly what the faint crunching meant. Oh my god. But I still had to remove the socks/shoes. Number 2. Telling a highly addicted PT that I wouldn't be giving him the narcotic RX he wanted after he had run out of his prescribed meds early because he took too many. This was actually the only time I've ever said frick to a patient. I'm not giving you an RX. I also spoke with your pain management doctor, and he does not want me to fill anything for you since you made the choice to take too many of your medicines. The patient starts flapping arms and legs in bed. What are you doing? I'm having a seizure. That's not a seizure, that's a tantrum. Patient gets completely still, looks me straight in the eye, and craps his pants. What the frick did you do that for? Because you're not giving me the medicine I need. Now you have to tell the nurse to come clean me up. Yeah, no. I will have the nurse bring you a clean gown and a towel. Bathroom's right next door. This was in med school, dermatology rotation. I got to see my own patient. So I asked what the problem was. He told me he thought his genital warts were back. I asked why. He didn't say a word, but turned around, dropped his pants, spread his butt cheeks, and showed me a cluster of genital warts around his anus at least 10 centimeters in diameter. Even when he stood up straight, it was just sticking out of his buttocks. I put up my most professional voice to say, yes, I think you're right. The man thought this was hilarious. I'm not sure if I've not seen more surprising things after this or I've just gotten used to them. ER nurse here. We brought a code trauma off the helicopter. A lady who was a passenger in a really bad wreck. Her husband was driving and was dead at the scene. Once we got her stable, the OR staff came to take her to surgery. I gathered up the clothes that we had cut off of her and grabbed her purse that EMTs had removed from the car. There was a lot of blood on it, so I thought I should just grab her wallet instead. I reached in and grabbed what I thought was her wallet, pulled it out. It had hair. It was a chunk of her husband's scalp. I interned in a city that gets very cold in the winter. Homeless people who were having a tough time surviving outdoors would come to the ED to get admitted, even if just overnight. They get a warm bed, a few hot meals, and a cleanup. This one fellow was in really rough shape, couldn't walk. The poor nurses did most of the cleanup, delousing, sponge bath, dressing the open sores. My job was to do the physical exam, including the mandatory rectal. Literally had to lift that scrawny flap of a butt cheek and pick the encrusted dirt/feces/matted hair away from the rectum to expose the anus. Thankfully, I only had to turn 180 degrees to reach the sink that I dry heaved into. But before this fellow can be discharged, he needs a podiatry consult. His black, gnarled feet have thick yellow big toenails that have grown in a circle and are now piercing the bottom of the toe, the reason he can't walk. Podiatrist intern comes in, starts a foot soak, and proceeds to tackle those nails with something that can only be described as modified tin snips. Now you know how some people have that habit of opening their mouth when concentrating really hard? Yup, he clipped that nasty nail and it flipped right into his mouth. We shared the sink. It's okay, Ryan. You've only got 13 more minutes to go. You're gonna be fine. Story from one of my friends who worked as a paramedic in Hamburg for some time. Mind you, this is disgusting. They were called to an unconscious person, drug addict, who was slumped down on a park bench close to the train station where back in the days the most drug addicts would hang around. They approached the guy and tried to wake him up, checked his vital signs, etc., then put him on the ground. He had no shoes on, but only wrapped up his legs in plastic bags. If you have ever been around hardcore drug addicts, you know most of them don't smell too good. After a while, they just give up on personal hygiene, which incidentally is actually more dangerous than the drug itself, since they tend not to treat their scabs and whatnot. This guy reeked to high heaven, and once they proceeded to check his plastic bag shoes, they saw why. His legs up to his knees were completely black and full of maggots. He had an infection in both legs due to shooting up heroin and never treated them. My friend said that once they lifted the plastic bags up a little, which were melted into his decaying flesh, little mountains of maggots would fill around his feet. Hands down, one of the most disgusting things he has seen. Doctor here. When I was working in the ER one evening, I had my worst experience so far. I was called to one of the examination rooms that are designed for infectious patients. This is already a bad sign, as it usually involves some sort of abscess that needs to be drained. However, this time, it was far worse. I was told by the nurse that it involved a man who had bilateral venous ulcers on his legs and that they were now infected. I looked through his journal and saw that he last saw a doctor about 10 months earlier and no note of any checkups after, not by a nurse or a GP. Therefore, I asked my nurse when someone last took a look at his legs. Quote, not since his last journal entry. Then I asked when was the last time he changed his dressings on the legs. Quote, he hasn't. Some background info on the patient. Old man who lived by himself in his trailer that was parked in the middle of a forest. He had no running water. He was a bit of a drinker and a general I don't give a crap mentality. Awesome. Suited up and went into the room. The room smelled like an odd combination of stale beer, mold, and disease. Certain infections smelled different, and this one was very pungent, almost sulfuric. I introduced myself to the patient, who didn't understand what the heck he was doing there. All he wanted was some antibiotics for a flu, and then he was sent here. Why the heck do you want to look at my legs for? They were already taken care of last year. Great. So we started unfolding the dressing. They were crusty and crackled as we unwrapped the first leg. As we got deeper, it changed color to some sickly yellow and the stench became worse and worse. One of my nurses left the room to throw up. Then I saw it. Very small, but inside a fold, there was a little maggot who squirmed. Crap. When we finally got to the wound, we saw all the little maggots feasting on this man. There must have been 50 of them. The stench was absurd. I was focusing a lot to breathe through my mouth, but then I felt like I could taste it, which made it even worse. My nurse came back and promptly went out again. I unwrapped his other leg, and same story there, but the infection was much deeper, and I could see a few tendons on the base of the ulcer. Absolutely delicious. We had to clean off the maggots and place them in a bowl, but they were squirming and went on the floor and crawled all over the place. I had to watch my feet so I didn't step on them. After that, we took the patient to hose him down to at least try to get rid of some of the smell. Then booked to the OR for debridement and a fresh vacuum dressing. Discharged a few days later with strict instructions and booked him in to return for redressings and checkups. Then, we never heard from him again. TLDR, maggots. Lots of maggots. Removed a shoe from a patient with a severe diabetic foot. 2 cockroaches crawled out of it. Paramedic here, working in the ER one night. We had a guy come in complaining of groin pain, so we bring him back, and it turns out he has a master lock, the kind with the spinning dial that you use to secure your locker at school, locked around his member. Essentially, blood could flow in, but could not flow back out, so this thing was hugely swollen. He had panicked after he realized he could not remember the code, dealing with a real genius here, and he took a screwdriver to the dial and snapped it off. So, we consulted with urology, and the urologist wanted to take him to surgery, cut his ween lengthwise, slide the top out, then the bottom, and then suture it back. Needless to say, the patient wasn't thrilled with option A, so option B was for this big nurse, we'll call him Tom, to go in with bolt cutters and cut it off. Option B selected, curtain closes. Tom gives a 1, 2, 3. A loud scream at 3, a pop noise. Tom exits with a broken lock, and the man was sent to the floor to recover. That's just one of so many, but I always tell that one. A bit late to the party, but here's my contribution. I have some nasty pus stories, but I think the top post wins hands down in that category. So here's something a bit different. Just a couple of months ago, actually. Woman about 35 years old comes in for a pap smear. Okay, no problem. Put the speculum in and maneuver it around a little bit to find the cervix, and I see something dark brown in the right lateral fornix. My first thought was, oh crap, cancer. You see, when I was an intern, I had a patient on whom I found very dark, friable tissue on the posterior wall of the upper genitalia, which eventually turned out to be rectal cancer that had spread into the genital wall and was quite advanced. You know, one of those patients you kind of never forget. Anyway, I try and gently scrape at this dark brown area to get a feel of what it was when the smell hit me. I imagine if death itself died and rotted for a few weeks, this is what it would smell like. My medical assistant scooted away to the edge of the room. Poor thing couldn't leave the room as she was my chaperone. I stopped breathing through my nose and started to breathe only a couple of times a minute from my mouth, of course turning my head away from the source of the smell to take a breath. Anyway, maneuvering the speculum a bit more and scraping a bit at the brown area some more revealed an answer to the mystery. It was a cylindrical, thick wad of something. An old tampon. The patient had no idea that it was there, and her period had ended over a week ago. So this thing had been there for over a week and the lady was walking around living life as usual. Thankfully, she did not get toxic shock syndrome. Retrieval of the tampon was uneventful, and the lady was sent home with advice on being more careful with remembering to take out tampons or perhaps consider switching to pads instead. Imaging tech here, so I basically look at black and white images of people's innards. Once I had a guy, and it looked like his abdomen was filled with fluid, but it looked very odd. Then I realized the fluid was moving. The guy had the biggest aortic aneurysm I've ever seen, so big I couldn't measure it on my machine. He got sent off to the hospital. I was in outpatient services that day, and I don't know what happened to him. I also had a woman with so many holes in her heart, in the muscle between the heart chambers, that it was like Swiss cheese. Another time, I was in a prison scanning a con. He'd been shot and all of his abdominal muscles were removed. He wore a Velcro girdle to keep his stomach in place. I put my scanner down on his abdomen, and I had to figure out what organs he was missing, because he had some removed from after being shot, but he had no clue. I think he was missing a kidney, the gallbladder, part of the liver, and like half his pancreas. Token, not a doctor, but I am a nurse and I have a story. I was working in the emergency department one afternoon, and we had an elderly lady just calling out, help me, repeatedly all afternoon. She was brought in by her nursing home for, quote, agitation, which is normally code for they can't handle them anymore. So the patient was placed with the carer assistant to try and calm her down and make sure she didn't wander around the ward. The carer was helping to feed the patient, and I walked past when suddenly the lady just breathed her liquid diet in and collapsed backwards. I, of course, instantly pushed the med emergency button and everyone comes running from all over. We assess her airway and it's deemed clear but not self-supporting. No food in there, which was strange. She wasn't breathing and no heartbeat was present, so one of the male nurses starts compressing on her chest while another nurse tries to insert an airway. As he compressed on her chest, a literal fountain of murky green goo spurted from her mouth all over the walls, ceiling, medical staff, literally everywhere. And of course, we were all like, what the heck is this crap? And the poor male nurse had to keep compressing the chest while the other nurse kept trying to suction the patient's airway to clear it enough to insert an airway. After 5 or 6 minutes, the nurse finally gets the airway in after suctioning over 6 liters of this goo. And after some defib, the doctor declared the patient dead. The bay and the surroundings say 5 or 6 meters was just drenched in this slimy, murky, brown-green mess. It was absolutely, breathtakingly disgusting. Eventually, we found out the poor old lady had a massive bowel obstruction, had a cardiac arrest while eating, and the goo was days and days of liquid fecal matter. Safe to say, I scrubbed myself raw in the shower that night. Content warning, this one's pretty sad, violent, and messed up. On my first weeks in trauma ER, 4th year of med school, we had an 11-year-old girl come in who was literally dumped out of a car in front of a hospital with one side of her body completely mutilated. What remained of her limbs just hanging like huge chunks of meat, and the rest of her body was burned all over. And there was so much blood. Maybe it's because I panicked a little, but I don't think I've ever seen so much blood in my life. We later found out someone in her family, father or cousin, not sure, was a known criminal who had just got out of jail time for blowing up ATMs with homemade explosives. They claimed she found a stash they had hidden, but we really believe she was helping them pack it. Either way, it was the ugliest/saddest thing I've ever seen. Thankfully, this next story is a lot cheerier. I was working as a scribe when we went to see an 8-year-old girl that had a fever. Nothing too remarkable until we started the physical exam. We examined her head, normal. We examined her upper extremities, normal. Then we pulled up the blanket to examine the lower extremities. Her feet were the size of an infant's. You should have seen the look on the doctor's face as he was trying to figure out how the girl's feet got so small. The mother looked up at the doctor, saw the look of confusion on his face, and said, "Those aren't her feet." She pulled up the blanket a little further, revealing a pair of perfectly healthy feet, nestled next to the feet of a doll that she had put under the blanket. We saw the doll's feet and thought they were the girl's. For those wondering, she had the flu. She turned out fine. Paramedic here. Back when I was a rookie, we ran a call to assist the police with an injured person. Get on scene to 5 to 6 cops and a large naked man in cuffs sitting on the curb. In the middle of February, in the mid-Atlantic region. Check the guy out while talking to the cops. Apparently, he had decided to smoke some PCP and the cops ended up having to tase him. The part of the story you've been waiting for, one taser barb in the umbilicus and the other in the head of his member. TLDR, PCP leads to a new member piercing courtesy of the police. Last one, I promise. Surgical registrar here. I was working in a smallish hospital in a rural town in Australia. We were asked by the medical team to see a patient that had been admitted under their care by the emergency department overnight. Happens quite often in that hospital, with the CT demonstrating a very distended bladder. They apparently had trouble with the catheter, so they called me to have a look. With much hesitation, I went up to see her on the ward. So I managed to put the catheter in with a lot of trouble. This lady was fecally incontinent. A little bit of urine drains out, and I just keep thinking, something's not right. I go back and look at the CT scan, and the IDC placed in the emergency department looks like it's appropriately positioned, subsequently pulled out. Behind it was one big sucker of a uterus, absolutely full of what appeared to be a fluid density. The report read, along these lines, I crap you not, as follows. Conclusion. There is a very distended bladder. The catheter balloon is situated in the prostatic urethra. Moderate to severe hydronephrosis is noted. To all the people pointing out that women don't have prostatic urethras, I'm well aware. That was the whole point. The radiologist was very embarrassed and apologetic when I called him to amend the report. Long story short, I speak to the consultant. We get her to theater. With great difficulty, we managed to dissect our way around this huge uterus, and we called the O&G guys to come and help get it out. Unfortunately, during this process, the uterus bursts, and there is a boatload of pus that just streams out. It smells so freaking horrible. There are people gagging around us at this yellow-green, sulfuric-smelling goo. The scrub nurse can no longer take it and vomits in her mask. The consultant is looking at me like, screw you for bringing this to theater. We finished this case, and I am so glad. I get home and I keep thinking, I can still smell this awful thing. I have another hour-long shower. All night I can still smell this thing. Morning comes, I can't have breakfast because I can still smell it. I get to the hospital and everyone is wearing masks. Apparently, the smell was so horrible, and the extraction in our theater was so outdated that it had somehow pumped the smell into the vents around the hospital. All night, small amounts were leaking out into the atmosphere, causing this horrendous smell. Silver lining? Lady lived for another 3 years. TLDR, I operated on a lady with a huge uterus full of pus. Consultant hated me for the rest of the year. Lawyers of Reddit. At what point, when working for a defendant, did you realize my client is a monster? A lot of years ago, I used to work as a solicitor's representative. Cases go to Crown Court, barrister deals, and I am there for the paperwork, additional stuff with client, etc. 70-something-year-old man had been in jail for 15 years for an assault on a child. Solicitor and barrister working on getting him released due to him getting clean reports from just about everyone. Guards took him out of jail to a dentist, and as he entered the waiting room, he saw 2 children and ran straight at them. Guards stopped him. 3 weeks later at court, I was the one that sat him down in a room to explain that no, this isn't a hearing to release you. It is so you could be committed to a mental health secure facility for the rest of your life. He didn't take that well. I shed no tears. I am not a lawyer, but a legal assistant. We got a client off of a murder charge. 2 weeks later, she was caught with a similar weapon and situation, except this time, the guy didn't die. Not the client, but my managing partner. The client was a senile 90-year-old man. He wanted to sell land worth a little less than $1 billion to some businessmen. Suffice to say, there were many who wanted to take advantage of the situation. One such person, to my dismay, was our managing partner. The partner wanted to insert a provision that would have effectively funneled about 60% of the proceeds solely to him. You could see how his eyes gleamed at the mere mention of money. The provision, quote, got lost in the revisions. I was doing the revisions. I'm no longer part of that scummy firm. My general psychology professor worked for the state of Arkansas assessing criminals to see if they would qualify as criminally insane. He told us a story one time about a guy who would get glass shards and hide them underneath his skin, presumably to use at a more opportune time. He said his interview with the guy made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. I'm on the other side, but I've got a defendant who went to prison for starving 3 adopted children to the point that they needed weeks of hospitalization, then got out of prison and married a guy with children so that she could start starving them too. Listening to her interview where she attempts to justify what she did to both sets of kids disturbed me more than any of the murder cases I've worked on. We had a client try and enforce a post-employment restraint against a 19-year-old receptionist after she quit and started working for a competitor. The reason? He wanted to, quote, make her life hard because she wouldn't sleep with him, a creepy 57-year-old man. Him trying to sleep with her was the reason she quit. Unsurprisingly, he didn't take our advice to discontinue his claim, and so we ended up sending him elsewhere. Hey, so at this point in recording, I kind of realized that the thread continues into a whole bunch of really sad, depressing, graphic, and violent stories. So I'm just letting you know now, this is where things start getting really bad. Seriously, viewer discretion is advised. I listened to a 911 call where the victim's throat was slit while on the call by her client. I will never forget her gurgling and sounding like she was dying. Somehow, she ultimately lived through this, saying, "He killed me. He killed me." She tried to sell her baby. I found out during a hearing in front of the judge. Oh, I can share a good story. I had a teacher in high school who was a former lawyer. We always asked him why he gave up his practice to start teaching. He finally caved and explained that his last case was the defense of 3 people. Apparently, there had been a 4th. It was 2 couples who, in the act of a drunken, drugged-out orgy, decided to kill, partially eat, and dismember one of the women. I guess it seemed like a good idea at the time. As a lawyer, he said it was pretty open and shut, but he had to get his clients the best result possible, and he was exposed to all the horrid details, the pictures, and their reasoning. My teacher had such a far-off look when he explained it that we could see it really got to him. The first and last family law case was assigned to me as a first-year associate. My client broke his wife's jaw and said that if they were home in Russia, he would have killed her because he could pay his way out of prison there. My mom is a lawyer. This is the story about how she quit being a public defender. When you're a public defender, you don't get to choose your cases. She got assigned a young man who, with the help of his girlfriend, had gotten a kitten from a quote, free to a good home ad in the newspaper. Then they brought it home and gave it to their dog as a chew toy. I think they also filmed it. So yeah, she said she needed a shower after every meeting with him, canceled her PD contract after the case concluded. I've done a lot of prison legal aid, and I could tell stories about kitty diddlers that would turn you green, but instead, I'll turn you green a different way. I had a kid, 17, who was mildly cognitively disabled due to brain trauma he sustained at the hands of his birth parents, who ended up with a really wonderful foster care family and thrived. He was a popular kid in school, good athlete, got a girlfriend, and invited her to meet up and be teenagers one night in a corn silo, which I guess is a thing that country kids do. I don't know. This all comes from the pre-sentence investigation report I read before taking his case. But this girl met him at the silo and they were hanging out inside. By his account, they were having a nice time and he was really enjoying himself. Then, for no particular reason, he picked up a 2x4 and bashed her skull in. He then used a combination of very crude farm implements, like shovels and hoes, to chop her body up and bury it in the corn and went home like nothing had happened. Hey, you asked. Had a divorce client, husband and father, who disowned his autistic son, tried to argue that he should get all of his wife's retirement having not worked for 12 years, contacted me during the height of Hurricane Sandy. He was in the Bronx and me in Manhattan, saying he wanted to hold his wife in contempt for not paying him that day while the storm slammed NYC, told me I was making a huge mistake getting married. My wedding date was November 3rd, 4 days after Sandy, saying that I was going to be miserable and regret it. I could go on. But the worst was when, several months later, since his divorce was taking a long time, he sent death threat letters to myself and my wife saying that he had hired an executor to kill the two of us if his divorce wasn't finalized in 60 days. Called the police and they said he left his premises one day earlier. I heard nothing from him until February 2014 when he emailed me saying he needed a winter coat from his wife and could I help get it for him. Ironically, the divorce didn't have to be completed because he ended his own life before the judge signed the judgment of divorce. TLDR, miserable guy who wanted to spread his misery and crossed the line when he threatened to kill my wife. Edit. For something a little lighter, this Memorial Day weekend reminds me of not my worst client, but definitely my dumbest. I was representing her on a child custody and child support matter. She was calling me on Memorial Day saying she really needed to speak to me. I called her back and asked if it was urgent since it was Memorial Day and all. She said, "Oh, I didn't think that Jews celebrated Memorial Day, so I thought you were going to be available." I had a client who was accused of domestic violence. Essentially, he threw his girlfriend out of a second-story window. Now, he's got a terrible history, but so do a lot of my clients, and his attitude is a little entitled, also typical. But he also knows the deal and wants a plea deal, so I'm not really prepared when he absolutely refuses the no jail offer from the state. Keep in mind, there were like 5 witnesses. Why? Because they wanted him to pay for her medical bills. Okay, a jerk, but whatever, not the worst. What did it was his counteroffer. "I ain't paying that woman's bills. Tell them I'll pay for the window." Prosecutor was not happy. A bit shocked to learn that by throwing someone out of a second-story window in front of 5 witnesses, it was possible for him to get offered no jail time. The first week I started at my current criminal defense firm, I was tasked with cataloging discovery from our client's phone. The phone had multiple, talking around 4,000, videos, photos, and text exchanges with women under 16. Though not all of the girls' ages were confirmed, most, if not all, were under the legal age of consent and many were barely pubescent. Naked and being prostituted over 1 year. He would lure these girls in exchange for drugs. Nothing felt totally bizarre until I came across one video where he was clearly forcing himself upon a literal child who was so high on drugs, not willingly, but rather forced, and choking her in the process. When our firm confronted him, he said he was in love with her and that's why he did it. He would also take these girls to hotels and make them bang with one another while he taped, but nothing beat what I said above. Pretty horrifying stuff for my first week on the job. When this person, an executive, said she was firing any employee who had a serious illness or injury, while promoting fundraisers at a local church for cancer sufferers no less, in part because employees, thinking she'd be sympathetic, would reveal their confidential health info to her. Criminal defense lawyer. I can name a few instances where I was just absolutely disgusted with my client. Caveat, these are mostly years ago when I was taking just any old case. I most practice white collar and federal now. Number 1. I won a DUI case because the government messed up on something right before trial was to begin. My client gives me a hug and completely reeks of alcohol. He was driven to court. I took his keys and called his mother. Number 2. Client who was accused of touching a 12-year-old. He was mid-40s at the time, and I had to shut him down real quick when he tried to tell me how the 12-year-old was coming on to him. Number 3. I represented a woman for a grand theft charge. Left her in my office to get some things copied before she left. After she left, I realized my sunglasses and car keys were stolen. I tracked her down in the lobby and told her I was not going to represent her anymore, and I would call the police if she didn't empty her pockets in front of me and give me my things. Number 4. I had a client who was released after 25 years in prison for murder, and then the same day he beats up his prospective new landlord. He ended up getting another 10 years. He was unrepentant and laughed about how he hit the guy so hard his eyeball popped out. I thought, this guy deserves to be in prison. Took the case to trial anyway and, shocker, lost, and he got 10, the max. Number 5. Client who pretended to be a doctor so he could sell steroids. According to the Gov, he had numerous clients who were made to believe that his steroids would cure their cancer. They paid him hundreds of thousands of dollars, and some of them died. I just thought that was pure evil. Defended my client in a lawsuit who defrauded his business partners. Evidence was already overwhelming that my client was liable. Client made matters worse by fabricating evidence and presenting it in court. He got called out on it by his dad's attorney who had the same evidence. It tanked my client's case. My client continued lying to me despite the overwhelming evidence showing he fabricated evidence. He lost big. In addition to a large judgment, he got hit with several felonies for fabricating evidence. Also, the business partners my client screwed over were his dad and brother. My significant other's mother, Elle, was abusive. She frequently hit her husband, was a compulsive liar, and just generally made her family miserable. When they were settling the divorce, the judge initially deemed a testimony from the kids, my SO and her brother, unnecessary, probably because they were minors at the time, and testifying against one of their parents would be hard on them, to say the least. However, the lawyer representing Elle was really insistent that they testify. Well, it must have been a shock to the lawyer to suddenly have 2 more witnesses with dozens of accounts of driving under the influence, domestic violence, etc., etc. We figured Elle must have lied to her lawyer about some significant details because they were completely caught off guard and more than a little angry after the testimony. We like to believe it helped solidify some of the criminal charges placed against her. It was a nice bit of karma after years and years of gaslighting and false rumors that her own lies got her caught. Content warning, this one's pretty gory. Attorney's wife here. I used to help him file away evidence and reports. Came across a file with video. Curiosity got the better of me, especially when husband told me not to watch it. File gives this story. Woman was at a boyfriend's trailer out in the middle of nowhere, got mad at boyfriend, so smacked him in the head with a metal bat and went on her merry way home. Boyfriend is apparently not a pleasant person, and nobody really misses him or looks for him. He is fired from work in absentia. On day 7, boyfriend's neighbor finally stops by, hears hoarse screaming, and calls police. That's where the video came from. Day 7. One of the cops was wearing a camera on his uniform. It shows him and his partner going through the house, finding dog feces all over the floor. Boyfriend's 2 Rottweilers, who were also in the house, went without food for about 6 days before they started eating bits and pieces of him. The camera shows the moment the cop found the body on its side, rolled it over, and he's blinking. Eyes open, with most of his face gone. The woman didn't even bother to let the dogs out before she left. I do not help file cases anymore. When I had to go to the U.S. Attorney's Office to view the evidence in this case, there they were. Hundreds of images of CP that he had traded, the close-up images of genitals that he had taken and sent around the internet, the pictures of his neighbor's daughters playing in their kiddie pool. Realized he just could not help himself. But he also never once claimed responsibility or showed remorse, so I don't feel too badly for him. Late to the party, but anyways, my first internship in law school was at a matrimonial law firm in a very wealthy area. Think millionaires and billionaires getting divorced. One of the first cases I worked on involved the parents of a victim of a high-profile school shooting. The parents were divorced and had been prior to the death of the child, and were now battling over who would get the victim's compensation fund money and the funds they received from a fundraiser they set up themselves on a GoFundMe-type site. These were incredibly wealthy people fighting over what was literal chump change to them and asking the public to donate to them as if they needed it. They were so clearly exploiting the death of their child for money and to tick off the other parent. It was honestly one of the most disturbing things I have encountered ever. Not a lawyer, but worked for a law firm as an investigator. One of our clients stabbed an ex-lover multiple times over $100. Perp then ran out of the house all bloody. Neighbor and her teenage daughter see him covered in blood and rush inside to see if they can help while they call 911. Victim is still alive. On the 911 call the daughter made, you can hear the mom singing Amazing Grace while she tried to stop the bleeding. You can also hear the victim, with a stab wound in her neck, gurgling on blood while she tries to sing along. The EMTs arrived in under 3 minutes, but it took the police 19 minutes from the call to show up to clear the scene for them. She lived for 17 minutes. I saw the photos of the scene with the body still in place. It looked like a scene straight from Dexter. Oh man, I'm always late when I have a good one. Not a defendant, but a divorce. Client is a late 30s woman, 2 kids, idyllic suburban life with her incredibly lucrative medical profession husband. He caught her cheating. He wanted to patch things up. She decided on a divorce. So far, nothing out of the ordinary, unfortunately. Then I start getting the details. He caught her on his birthday, in their bed, while the kids were downstairs. Dude decided to come home early as a surprise, and his wife was getting banged by a 19-year-old. But wait, there's more. Really fun stuff from the husband. Guy had been treated for gonorrhea twice, and both times he had caught it from his wife. The second kid wasn't his. It was obvious because the child was 100% some race, and the dad was not that race. Bad stuff, right? Well, enter the texts, emails, etc. She was carrying on like a dozen affairs at any given time, spanning years. She would bring them home and tell the kids they were electricians, plumbers, etc. She'd screw other guys within minutes of dropping her kids off at school. I've met some awful people in my time, but this woman straight up told me how much this guy loved her and how much she manipulated the crap out of him. He knew about a lot of the stuff, and each time he found something new, he just tried to win her back. I don't want to go into the details of what happened, but some money that you get, you really don't want. Lifelong criminal defense lawyer here. To be completely honest, it's not about the offense, but about the person. I've had people accused of murder that I really kind of liked and thought well of. I've had people accused of shoplifting who have given me the heebie-jeebies and seem like psychopaths. Speaking purely from a criminal standpoint, having a client who is a monster doesn't matter in terms of your duty to them, but it does make the job less pleasant. My worst clients have been people who are comfortable scamming others of their money. Murder, robbery, and most crimes involve regular people who did or may have done something stupid due to alcohol or situations. But the client you keep an eye out are the ones charged with fraud and the like. Liars, cheats, and all-around shady people, generally speaking. Even the gangs operate on a code of conduct, an old-fashioned war-like code of conduct. Honor and courage are important to them even though they commit crimes. 22 years threatened twice, so not that bad. The real danger? Not in criminal law. It's family law. That's where people get really heated. It's personal. Prosecutor here. Most of us in this profession have the utmost respect for those on the other side of the aisle. Most people really don't know or understand the really messed up stuff that we have to witness and deal with on a daily basis. There's a reason attorneys have the highest percentage of alcoholics by profession. I never thought my client is a monster, but there are a few I've thought were idiots or liars or both. 2 of my favorites are a client who instructed me, against my advice, to object to the temporary judge even though we had just discussed it and I had just told the judge we were okay with him. And a client who testified pretty much the exact opposite of what she had told me in our initial meetings and what we had repeatedly discussed. Civil defense here, so maybe not as juicy as some of the criminal defense folks. Some of the work I do is employment defense, particularly sexual/age harassment/discrimination cases. I'm pretty cynical and see a lot of cases where plaintiffs are full of it, particularly in harassment/discrimination cases. In one case, I was defending a company and that company's manager jointly. The manager seemed like a straight-up guy, and I pride myself in being a good judge of character. I was pretty convinced the case was just payback from a disgruntled employee. To my credit, the plaintiff, a 30-year-old female, was a really poor employee by all accounts. Still, it didn't prepare me from what I found during a review of every email the company had stored on their servers. Not only did this guy stick his hand down this woman's shirt without consent, when she threatened to go to HR, he said he'd get her fired and make sure she never got a job again. The lady was a single mother with 3 kids. He also propositioned her for screwing in exchange for a day off. He thought the email had been wiped because the company had a 1-year retention policy. Apparently, some of the company's older emails remained on a server before the policy was put in place because of the migration of the emails from an older outsourced IT company. Not sure if my terminology is right here. I had to substitute out of the case thereafter for conflict reasons, since my two clients' interests were no longer aligned. Very disturbing content warning. Even though I've made a throwaway, I'm going to be a bit vague because I still take my ethical duties to former clients seriously and can't breach privilege or the NDA I signed. This is a story from a long time ago, during the summer after my first year of law school while I was briefly working at a well-known criminal defense firm. The client whose case I was working was one of several defendants charged with a conspiracy to commit murder. 3 individuals had committed the murders, and several others had either helped plan it, abducted the victims, came along to watch, or filmed it. In order to see whether our client was one of the individuals present at the scene, I had to watch multiple videos of the murders. I watched multiple people brutally killed in about the worst possible way you can imagine. They were chopped into pieces while they were alive and had their skulls stomped in. It wasn't some grainy security footage. It was HD video taken by bystanders just a few feet away. The videos showed someone's brain squirting out of their head and another person screaming as their hands and arms were hacked off. I also had to listen to the audio to see if our client's voice could be heard. The screams were bad. The laughter was worse. It has stuck with me for years and years, and I don't see it going away anytime soon. Thankfully, my internship at that firm ended a few weeks later at the end of the summer. I never looked up the sentence from the case and have no desire to. In our case, there was no presumption of innocence. The individuals involved had all taken pleas in hope that the prosecutors wouldn't seek the death penalty. The only thing that would change was whether our client would get the death penalty if he was present/filming, or life in prison if we showed that he played a more minimal role. Working in criminal defense meant setting my judgment for people aside so that they could be afforded the rights guaranteed to them by the Constitution. I still did my job to the best of my ability, but I found myself lying awake at night for several weeks in a row, praying to every god I knew that each of them involved would fry in the electric chair, and that someone would laugh at their screams too. After that internship, I never returned to criminal law. I now practice civil law, where I help people recover for wrongs done to them. Who is the most hated person in your workplace and why? Current job is a bore on this subject, so we'll go to my last. Tim was the guy everybody hated. He was lucky we all felt bad for his quirks. Every working day, Tim punched in at exactly 8 a.m. and out at 5 p.m. In between those hours, you were lucky if you saw him working. It was because of him we no longer had Secret Santa during the holidays, catered monthly lunches, or holiday bonuses. Secret Santa. Tim was quite frugal, and when I say quite, I mean he was cheap. Every employee in the company voted the dollar amount they wanted to spend on another for the Secret Santa. The average dollar amount came out to $50. Tim's vote was $1. I recognized his crappy handwriting. Everyone, including Tim, agreed to spend around that dollar amount. When it came down to opening presents, it was clear everybody went over that amount. Tim received a pair of tickets to a Dodgers baseball game, plus some Dodgers t-shirts, a hat, and the tickets were face valued at $175 each. His Secret Santa had season tickets and gifted him a pair from a set. When it came down for Tim to give his gift, I wondered who he got. He got his desk buddy. Jessie was the sweetest girl in the office. She worked with everyone and was the most polite, respectful, soft-spoken human I've ever met. When she opened her gift, I wanted to die. He got her lingerie. Not just any lingerie, crotchless, matching bra, and without any tags. Jessie was 5'9" and athletic. Whoever those clothes were for was someone athletically challenged. HR had a heyday with that one. Catered lunch. The last Friday of every month featured catered lunch with a short workday. It always revolved so that things never felt redundant. Mexican, Italian, barbecue, pizza, or Chinese. Tim religiously ate Mexican food. When the chosen Mexican restaurant was catering, Tim was first in line to eat. He would wait around the time clock near the patio doors so that when 1 p.m. hit, his hand was being scanned with 1 foot out the door. When it was any of the other catered meals, he made it known that he was irritated that so-and-so were catering. May 2013, I got to choose what we were having, and I chose Italian since my birthday was the following day. Tim was seriously mad about having Italian food. Mind you, for the next 2 months, the choices were either Italian or Chinese, so Mexican was nowhere near the table. Eventually, everyone heard a bit of his ramblings, and then it hit the ears of the company chairman. They called the heads of every department in and asked about Tim's feeling and how long this had gone on for. I explained how Tim was a quirky guy, but for some reason only liked Mexican food. Next morning, there was an announcement that we were no longer having company lunches. This meant no more going home at 2 p.m. and no more lunch for the office. Everyone was angry. Holiday bonuses. This is what got the ball rolling for Tim's demise. Our company manufactured steel products and shipped them to different distribution warehouses. Nobody in our office worked in sales, so nobody had commission-based pay. Every year, before our 2-week holiday vacation, we received our last checks for the year and a bonus. The bonus was a percentage of the profits divided up between all employees. It was great. Who doesn't like more money right before the holiday season? Tim, that's who. This particular year had been a bad one for us. Profits were down 10% due to one of our distributors filing for bankruptcy. So our bonuses were not as big as before, but they still equated to a paycheck's value. Everyone, other than Tim, was ecstatic that they were still receiving bonuses. When Tim opened his check, heck broke loose. I've never seen someone so angry about a bonus check in my life. First, he goes around asking everyone how much they received. We all received the same amount, but nobody wanted to show him their check. Then he tries to talk to his desk mates about receiving less than last year, and this is where it goes downhill. Everyone he asks tells him that they received more than last year's amount. You can see where this is going now. After everyone's gone for the day and a few of us stay to clean up the holiday party mess, Tim rushes the company owner and lays into him on why he received a lower bonus, that he feels undervalued, he should be asking for a raise. We can hear him yell through a closed window to the outside. The holidays pass, and Tim is as happy as ever. All department heads get called into what seemed like a normal Monday after the holiday meeting, and we're told the yearly bonus structure will no longer continue at our branch. Everybody knew why. A month later, Jesse finally got him fired after bringing light to several inappropriate harassment instances revolving around Tim. Last I heard, he moved to Kansas to live closer to his family. Edit. Wow, this really took off with a few people. Before the new year, I was already in exit plan mode after an acceptance at a larger company. I made it clear with the owners months beforehand so they weren't shocked. March 2014, I officially left, which was about a month after Tim. Many of my coworkers were older than me and could basically be my parents if you looked at the ages, so I didn't have an outside work relationship with anyone. However, I Facebook messaged an old coworker who's still there to get some updates for you guys. I'll update once I have new information. Update. So looks like everything is back to normal and the company chairman reinstated all the perks. Right after Tim was fired, the department heads had a meeting with the chairman and concluded Tim was the issue to all of this. The chairman agreed to reinstate the bonus structure, and now when Mexican food is ordered, there are always leftovers to take home. A bonus story. The coworker I talked to was called by a competing company as a reference for Tim a few years back. It just so happened that he answered the phone and worked the appropriate department. After a few weeks, the hiring agent called him back thanking him for his answers and that Tim didn't make it through the probationary period. He was the worst candidate they had that was the most qualified on paper. He didn't believe Tim lasted all the years we had him. In the 2 weeks he was there, he managed to tick off every coworker there. Amazing Tim. Won't name names in case this comes back to me, but he's a level 3 engineer who does absolutely nothing all day. He'll book a conference room and sit in the dark for hours. He'll sit at his desk and do actually nothing except exist. But his team, which he did not assemble and which he does not actually lead, is good enough to make him look good, so he keeps getting more responsibility. I work in a small chiropractic clinic. 3 chiropractors, 4 receptionists, 2 per shift. One of the receptionists literally does nothing but check patients in. We are supposed to work on billing and other tasks to do with insurance. She always leaves her Facebook logged in into the communal computers, so I like a bunch of dank meme Facebook pages for her. The woman who would use money from our pooled tip jar to fix her pricing mistakes. Literally stealing money from her coworkers to cover her butt. We all hated her. My mom works in a coffee shop and the manager will regularly take staff tips to cover any till discrepancies. Not only illegal, but a total jerk move, because the tips are pooled monthly and divided so it affects staff who weren't even in at the time. Edit. I was incorrect. This is totally legal. It's still a jerk move. If a national chain can't swallow a loss of £2 when the markup on a cup of coffee is almost twice that and punishes the staff, well, screw them. Once the manager accidentally ordered 2 cakes. Only one was sold and the other went out of date. He refused to have it on his wastage, denied making the error, and took £75 out of the staff tips for that one cake alone because that was the resale cost. Makes me heave. My boss's wife has been given a position of authority over my department. despite having no experience or expertise in the area. But the worst part is, she is an older lady and by all accounts seems to be suffering from dementia/Alzheimer's. Every single email you send her or email chain she's included on, she will respond without having any understanding of what was written to her. So then you have to spend the time explaining the whole content of the chain or email to her. We have to attend meetings with her where she will spend a lot of time rambling about things that have nothing to do with our work. We have to remind her or re-explain things that we talked about at the last meeting that are relevant because she doesn't remember or understand. Then the whole thing happens all over again in the next interaction with her, like it's Groundhog Day for her. We have this goober of a guy who works probably 1 full day a week. I actually get surprised if I don't have an email in my inbox the morning of saying he won't be in. Worst of all though, he sits nearest to the bathroom and makes comments like, "Wow, you were in there a long time. Must have been in number 2, when people come out. Worked for an attorney who was almost never in the office. And I'm not talking like she was in court or meeting clients outside the office. She just wouldn't show up. She missed calls and appointments all the time, but I get written up for missing a few days because my babies got sick and then I got sick. She was a jerk for other reasons too, but she was hypocritical on top of it. There was a time she didn't come in for 2 weeks and she argued with me about it and I asked her to show me on the calendar when she came in. She couldn't. She did not remain a partner for very long. We have a dude who rolls in at 10 and leaves at 2, 3 or 4 days each week. He has a different supervisor than us that works in another office even though he's on our team. So infuriating. We've talked to our boss so many times about him, but she can't do anything. Screw him. Edit. Many people don't like me for this, claiming that he gets plenty of work done in his time I see him. I'd like to say that's not true. He pawns off hours of work per week on us. That's why it's a problem. George the Joiner. Minimal number of fingers, bad personal hygiene, unintelligibly thick accent. This is not a man you want operating a forklift, operating machinery, or driving. If he carries something through the workshop, it's a safe bet that he will utterly destroy something with his own brand of half-blind ignorance. But what a man. Mysterious and enigmatic. Who is he? Where did he come from? When will he go back? Find out next time on Dragon Ball Z! Far and away, the most hated person in my carpentry shop is the deaf guy. I've only been working there a year, and everyone thinks he is the most vindictive, hateful, selfish, paranoid jerkwad to walk the earth. He's easily the hardest worker there. I can tell you with confidence that he has generated the most money for the company of anyone there. He absolutely owns his portion of the shop. He has it down like clockwork and doesn't waste a second. All that being said, he throws an absolute rabid fit whenever anything out of routine happens, and he won't look anyone in the eye, and he calls everyone lazy jerkwads. After a month of working there, I started to learn American Sign Language. I learned a few things at home and would say anything that I could to him. Happy Monday, how are you, etc. I learned how to ask about words, how to spell things, how to sign numbers. Pretty soon he's teaching me a word a day, then it speeds up to 3 to 5 words a day. Fast forward a year, and we talk constantly. What I learned is that he gets mad because he's been passed up for promotions because he's deaf. People don't tell him overtime is available when it's what he wants. He sees people coming in late and still taking breaks, and he never breaks those rules. He gets mad that no one ever tells him about new machines being bought or new jobs coming in or the gossip. I unknowingly became his liaison. He stopped fighting with people. He's able to get all of the jokes we tell at lunch because I can translate. Other people are learning sign language as time goes on too. What I don't get is why no one ever gave him the benefit of the doubt. It would suck to be deaf and never know what was going on. Some people have worked with him for 15 years and no one has ever learned any ASL. He thanked me recently for being a good friend. He said things are a lot better now. Edit, one guy in the shop did learn some sign language, all of the insults and swear words. Not working there anymore, but I had one coworker. Call him Roy, who was a POS. We worked in IT support, and Roy was considered the quote-unquote expert for a certain system our team managed. He was supposed to train me, but he only taught me the very basic stuff. He never told me about the plethora of problems that can occur with the system. When alerts did happen, which I had no idea what they were or how to respond to, he would chastise me and throw me under the bus. There was another incident where the boss didn't trust him to come in for an overtime shift, so I was asked to come in at a certain time to cover. I called Roy first thing in the morning and asked if he would come in. He said he would, so I went in at my normal time. Roy doesn't show, and I'm forced to work 10 hours that day to cover his lazy butt. Surprisingly, the incident didn't get him fired, but he did proudly announce he found himself a new job a month later. The new job rescinded their offer, and he went into survival mode. He deliberately continued to train me poorly to make himself, quote, unreplaceable, but the company refused to let him stay, and that was the end of it. Coworker who talks way too dang much. I can make conversation with my coworkers, but we all have a sense of when it's appropriate. She's the kind of person who bombards me with chatter as soon as I walk in, before I've even taken off my jacket. She tries to make conversation out of everything, to the point where it gets really annoying because it happens so frequently. I was really swamped with stuff the other day, and she stopped me just to point out that a customer's last name was one letter different from her own maiden name. Isn't it amazing? No, Carol, it's not. S constantly eats throughout the day, but to do this, he must take several trips to the canteen to acquire food. But on the way to the canteen, it starts with at least a 20-minute cigarette break. Complains heavily if anyone asks him to do anything, as he is always too busy. We have flexi-time at work, so he gets in early, and on the odd time I have turned up early, the office lights are always off. Apparently prefers working in the dark. Becomes deeply offended at any change in the office, and the temperature must be kept cold as he can't work if it's too warm. Can't stand the coffee addicts in the office as they need caffeine but drink several bottles of Coca-Cola every day. I've been in the office now for nearly 2 years, still yet to work out what he actually does. He smells, he's sweaty, and when he sneezes, he wipes his nose with his hand and then he cleans it off on the desk. I hate S, and so do the rest of us. Edit, I have no problem with working in the dark, but as an IT department, I feel it is better to do work with eyes open and the PC on, and not having the office door locked. I don't mind wearing my coat all year round in the office, gloves in winter, but I do feel a compromise could be met. I'm not asking for a sauna. Our most hated person is a troll who survives off cigarettes, Diet Pepsi, and the souls she drains, mine included. Some of her greatest hits, telling me I am not getting any younger, therefore my babies would be, quote, our word, her word, not mine, telling a delightful tale of how she once snuck in pork into a Muslim's diet, going on about her husband's pension and how she doesn't have to work, she just works for the fun of it. Yet she bums smokes and bus fare off people half her age. She lives to get anyone into trouble, yet she's incompetent herself, and when she's called on it, she says, to err is human. Every week she threatens to quit, but nowhere would have her. To err is human, but to be a piece of garbage is divine. You know those rows of staples you put in a stapler? He takes 2 of those, faces them against each other, and rubs them between his fingers all day. It may be worse than nails on a chalkboard, and he will not stop for everyone. Let me tell those of you who scrolled down this far about Supervisor Chef Bob. We all hated Bob. Bob wasn't a team player, you see. When we were swamped, everyone would skip breaks except for Bob. We would all help whoever was falling behind, except Bob. Bob did his own thing and left you to the wolves. Bob always pointed out what you did wrong or what you did lazily. Eventually, Bob started helping me a little when I would fall behind. I thanked him once for grilling a steak for one of my orders, and I made the mistake of telling him that steaks are my weak spot. I had trouble overcooking them. For weeks after that, he arranged it so I cooked every freaking steak. Time passes and I became, not to brag, one of the competent employees. I noticed one night that Bob was jumping in to help me whenever I fell behind. He would even ask what I wanted him to cover. Once I was working with him and I noticed Brenda was falling behind. Brenda is always falling behind. I was clear for a minute and told Bob that I was going to help Brenda for a minute. Bob said no. Brenda has to learn how to do her job. She won't learn if we always do it for her. And I saw Bob in a whole new light. He wasn't lazy. He just wanted us all to know our jobs. Once he knew anyone can handle anything, then he was quick to help out. He was, he admitted to me once, very bad at remembering who had taken breaks. He had no problem covering for a break. We just had to ask him instead of waiting forever for him to tell us to go. Now, Bob is gone. I was genuinely sad to see him go. Standards have fallen, and Brenda is still incapable of doing her job. A girl recently promoted to be a, quote, interim education director position, but she fails to leave out the interim part when introducing herself. She brings her untrained, disobedient dog to work, wears highly inappropriate clothing to a job working with kids, tells people they have to respect her because she's a director, leaves her desk a mess, makes every story about her, willfully ignores safety protocols if she doesn't have time for them, had fatherly nicknames for the old boss, sat on the boss's lap at the Christmas party kissing him on the cheek, and smiles like Ted Cruz. Why was that the part that got me? He is no longer working with us, but he is still legendary to this day. Since he is most likely on Reddit, I will refer to him as Magoo. Magoo and I both started at the same time in a science-based company, but in different departments. He looked really good on paper, well qualified, and interviewed fairly well, from what I was told. I sat next to him and we began chatting. It became pretty apparent that something was off on him. He would giggle to himself during the conversation and immediately began one-upping me in the conversation, saying how he had something better or knew more about what we were talking about. Not a big deal. I work with scientists and engineers, being one myself, and odd personalities are the norm. Within a day or two, I knew that I was not going to enjoy my time with Magoo. Our office has a tradition of getting bagels and cream cheese every Friday as a sort of reward for a long week. I get in at 8:30, Magoo is already munching happily on a loaded bagel and giggling to himself. Not a big deal either. I get my bagel, start working, Redditing, and head to the bathroom an hour later. I can see as I'm walking that Magoo is eating another bagel. Not cool, but I've gotten two myself from time to time if there are plenty left. 15 minutes later, I see Magoo eating another bagel and trying to sneak off with it. I confront him and tell him you can't eat 3 bagels before some people have had 1. He brushes it off and tries to pretend like he didn't know he had done it. This guy's in his 30s, by the way. Magoo's interests were wide and varied. Think being a part of esoteric clubs, makes his own gaming computers and brags about it. The worst part of being around him is that he takes over every conversation he is in, and he is in every conversation. He will literally walk up to a group of people, no matter what they are talking about, laughing like he heard something funny, and then interject with how he knows more about it or is an expert at it. It got to the point that we would avoid him at all costs, or just leaving when he came around. Didn't matter to Magoo, he would follow you and talk about his knowledge anyway. Magoo is also a closed-eye talker. You know who I'm talking about. The kind of person who will smugly assume he knows more about what you are saying and will close his eyes and turn his head away in an exasperated measure of, I can't believe I had to explain this, manner. He began to get on everyone's nerves, but began getting bolder with his interjections. He interrupted the CEO of our company during an important meeting to correct him on a detail that didn't matter. The balls on this guy. He also began changing login details, since he knew a good bit on computers, for shared machines for sequencing and changing protocols without getting approval. He ordered over $10,000 in materials for an experiment that wasn't authorized to answer something he had been wondering about, not even related to what we were doing. The last straw is when he started insulting people if they disagreed with him, including his boss. At this point, most people wouldn't even respond to him when he spoke to them, and most people just left when he came around, even in mid-sentence. How he lasted 3 months is beyond me, but the day he was fired, we were told to stay out of the offices in case he did anything drastic. After he was gone, he asked his boss for a reference. I still like to check up on Magoo every now and again. He is still unemployed and probably has no idea why. Edit, Magoo, if you are reading this, I hope that you are doing well. Please know that I tried hard to like you, but you need to let other people say things, even if they are wrong, without telling them what you know. I also hope that you find a job. No person deserves to feel unwanted or that they don't deserve success. Hopefully you can reevaluate how you treat people and have a few slices of humble pie. You can have some cool hobbies, even if you tell me about them with your eyes closed. Lawyers of Reddit. What's the dumbest thing you've seen take place in front of the judge? Serious replies only, but some of these are pretty funny. Saw one defense attorney demonstrate twerking during closing arguments of an assault with intent to kill trial. Your Honor, my client is not guilty. Why? Let me ask you this. Have you seen this? Throwing it back for a real one? I rest my case. DUI/DWAI/drug defendants show up to criminal court with beer/weed/F the police t-shirts constantly. During the direct examination of the defendant, the PD kept asking leading questions. After 5 or so sustained objections in a row, the judge had enough and sent the jury out of the room to yell at the PD. During the cross, about 10 minutes later, the judge again sent the jury out to yell at the defendant for trying to tell his story instead of just answering yes or no questions, not to mention he was clearly lying through his teeth. Also, the defendant was recorded committing the crime. So yeah, he was later found guilty. I was in front of a judge for oral argument and the other side, pro per, failed to show up. The judge called him and made him argue against our motion while driving and on his cell phone. The judge spoke for a minute, setting up the arguments for the guy, basically leading him to the core argument and what he should be saying if he wanted to get our motion denied. After a few moments of silence, the guy responds, "Judge, I'm too stupid to understand what you just said." That ended the argument quickly and in our favor. Personal story, I was sued once. Well, they meant to sue me, but actually sued my uncle. Same career. Named him in the documents and served him. Me, being young and clueless, thought I should go to the trial just in case. My uncle told me I absolutely should not. Now, here's where the opposing attorney screwed up. They never once tried to interview or talk to me, or my uncle, or they would have realized their mistake. Day of the trial, my uncle actually made it to the stand. From the way I heard it, questioning was hilarious. Were you working on blah 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 day? No. Please read this payroll statement. Doesn't this payroll statement say you were working? No. Look at this highlighted line. Isn't your name RVW260? Yes. Then you were working. No. This says KVW260 was working. My uncle said even the judge was laughing as he immediately tossed the case. People finding religion in front of a judge at sentencing. The judge would always respond with, "God may have forgiven you, but the state has not." That judge was a boss. Firm, fair, and totally awesome. That's the hardest thing I've ever heard a judge say. One guy I saw said, "Your Honor, I haven't been drinking anymore. I have been clean for 6 months, God is my witness." The judge responded, "Well, a lot of people say that, but the funny thing is, not once have they ever been able to bring him in to testify." The dumbest thing I've seen is a guy show up for not doing his community service in a shirt that said, "I'm not lazy, I just don't like to work." Judge asked him about it, and he said it was his only clean shirt. Everybody had a good laugh, even the judge. Seconds after being served with a protection from abuse order, opposing party flipped off the person who had obtained the order, and seconds after that approached her and asked if they could at least talk about it. Promptly arrested. I'm doing jury selection on a civil case in California. It is going to be a long trial, 6 weeks, so the judge is giving jurors a lot of latitude if they claim any hardship for serving that long. After about 30 minutes of voir dire, which ended up taking 3 days and several panels, one guy stands up and says in very broken English that he can't follow. The judge asks him if he speaks English well enough to render a fair verdict, and he looks confused and says no. The judge thanks him for his service and dismisses him from the panel. In perfect English, accent now gone, he says, "Thank you very much, Your Honor. Where should I put my badge before I leave?" Judge found him in contempt and ordered him to stay for jury duty for the next week. Usually you just stay for 1 day. If you don't get picked for a jury in that day, your service is over. During a plea hearing on a prostitution charge, the state proceeds to give the narrative of events. The SA starts to get a little uncomfortable trying to describe the specific act that led to the arrest. We all know the line he's reading is, quote, "sucked him off," but he's trying to find a nice way to say it for the record. He finally goes, where she then, proceeded to perform, fellatio. As soon as he says fellatio, the defendant stands up and straight up yells, "I didn't do any of that French crap, I gave him a blowjob!" Client said to judge, "Well, that's your opinion. It went as badly as you'd expect." Thank you, judge. No matter what happens. My objection gets overruled? Thank you, judge. Lose my motion? Thank you, judge. Judge says I'm fat, ugly, and unlovable? Thank you, judge. Unfair dismissal case. My client was summarily terminated for no reason. She recorded the dismissal on a dictaphone. The torrent of misogynistic, hateful abuse her boss spewed at her was unbelievable. He also assaulted her as she was removing the hands-free phone device from her car, repeatedly slammed her leg in the door, causing a fracture, all the while screaming at the top of his lungs, "Screw you, you piece of crap." Suffice to say, we played that tape 1,000,000 times in cross-examination. It was more what didn't take place. I was working for the DA's office, and we had a guy scheduled to appear for a vandalism charge. The guy had a long history of minor offenses, but the judge was in a lenient mood that day, so the guy was probably going to get off light. At the scheduled time, he hasn't showed up. His lawyer tells the judge he hasn't heard from the defendant that day. We wait. 10, 20, 30 minutes. At the half-hour mark, the judge is furious. She angrily tells the lawyer to get out and find his client and get him before her, no matter what it took, or she'd rain heck down upon the defendant. An hour later, the lawyer slinks back into the courtroom. The judge sees him and interrupts another lawyer to call him up to the podium. The poor lawyer proceeds to tell us that the defendant didn't show up because he was actually sitting in jail 2 counties over, having been caught trespassing the night before. Needless to say, that defendant got the book thrown at him. At the end of a DWI trial involving a pretty major wreck, in which the defendant was found guilty, the judge asked the defendant if he had anything he wished to tell the court during the sentencing phase. The guy thought for a second and said, "Your Honor, I'm real sorry. Normally I drive a lot more careful when I'm drunk." Had a client toss his car keys on the defendant table moments before sentencing for his 4th OWI. Judge asked how he got to court. Without blinking, said, "I drove. Why?" Good way to get a quick bail jumping charge for violating his no driving bail condition. We all forget to turn off our phones in court, but I once faced off against a lawyer whose phone rang right while he was in the middle of making his final submission to the judge. Even that might have been forgivable if he hadn't interrupted his submissions to take the call. I swear I was arguing against a preliminary hearing against a defense attorney from out of town, and in the middle of one of his direct examinations, his phone rings and he freaking answers it. "Hello? Oh, hi. Listen, I can't talk. I'm in court." "What? No, I'm in court. I'll call you back." "Sorry, Judge." The look on the judge's face was priceless. Then it was time for him to make the closing argument. He looks at the judge and goes, "One more time, Judge. What were the charges?" "DUI, dude. Just DUI. How did you get through this whole thing and not realize there was only one charge and it was DUI?" This sounds straight out of a lawyer's sitcom, and I would watch the heck out of that. A lot of clients want to speak up, "But Judge, you don't understand." But giving them the look of death and a jab in the ribs usually shuts them up pretty quickly. They're usually pretty okay. I found this gem doing some research one day, quoted from the case. As is evident from the foregoing excerpt from the transcript, the judge would not permit the appellant to speak to the issue of judicial bias. The appellant was agitated. The judge was, no doubt, frustrated. This exchange culminated in the appellant choosing to disrupt the proceedings by commencing to disrobe. The appellant described her actions to the judge as, quote, "a form of non-violent protest, which would continue until the judge would hear her motion for judicial bias." Wish I was there for that one. You don't often hear about a lot of court cases where people take their clothes off, but the formal language used in this makes it 100 times funnier. I do family law. Told 11 clients in a row that they could be drug tested, 5-panel P-test, you need to be clean for about a week. As part of the custody evaluation process, 7 of them failed. Lawyer here, I had a case where I was suing a lesbian on behalf of a former lesbian partner. It was a relationship property case. The one who was being sued put in issue whether they had even been lovers, or whether my client was just a flatmate or boarder in her home for the several years they lived together. I had no idea how I was going to prove that, but it turned out my client had saved all of the soppy love notes that her partner had left on the fridge, most of which were, "I love you, you little squishy oyster," and other ribald descriptions. That issue sunk pretty quickly once the box of those were produced. Sorry, that just sounds so wholesome. I would love to be called someone's squishy little oyster. That makes no sense to anyone except me, and that's why that's so special. I've seen a woman pee herself. Situation wasn't so tragic to warrant it, but she was sent back to jail, so understandable. A man called the judge by only his last name, which is great if you think he'll reciprocate the upcoming fist bump, and a large number of high, drunk, and other people say, "This is bullcrap." Also not a great technique in court like the first two. I've got a pretty good one, so hope this isn't buried. Husband and wife are going through a divorce and are having a custody hearing. Basically, the attorney is representing the father who wants to be able to have some rights to see his son, but mother has already been awarded full rights. Father's attorney is super passive-aggressive against the mother's attorney, really rubbing everybody the wrong way. Eventually, the mother's attorney snaps and quips back, "If he was as good of a father and husband as you claim, we wouldn't be here, would we?" Father's attorney has some dumb reply and the judge starts losing his cool. Another few comments later, and the judge ends the hearing. No adjudication, just takes the filings and demands that the parties get out of his chambers. This wasn't in the courtroom itself. In the hallway, the mother's attorney loses his crap, starts yelling at the other attorney. He yells back. They get into a full-on yelling match in the courthouse. Then the father, who is 230 pounds plus, steps between them to entreat them to chill out. starts telling both his lawyer and the wife's attorney that they are acting like children. People in the courthouse are giving them looks, assistants peeking out of doors, and the wife steps in. "You're both acting like a couple of kids. Soon-to-be ex-husband and I can handle this on our own." Then the couple who was in the middle of a vicious divorce step aside, talk for a few minutes, and walk back. "He's going to take son Tuesday night. You two," he points to the attorneys, "do whatever you need to do with the judge." I don't know what happened with that case, but it warmed my heart to see a father step between the two trained legal professionals and impress his wife so much that they were able to work things out. The sad part? The husband's lawyer saw it as a win for him because his conduct put his client in a position to, quote, break up the fight and show her that he is a great guy. Update, for those asking, this was in 2009. I don't know the final disposition of the case, just that the mother agreed to let the father spend some time with their son. And yes, this is a true story. I will never forget. We had a defendant bust into the court from the local jail. His case was called and he promptly walked up the podium, looked the judge dead in the eye, and crapped his pants, jumpsuit. He knew he was going back to prison and just wanted to cause as much havoc as possible. People were gagging and there was a general sense of, did that just happen? In the air. I'm going to start off with some context. This event took place on the first day of a murder trial in the Hong Kong High Court. Now, the official language used in the high courts of Hong Kong is English and not Cantonese. The judge for this particular case was British, but the lead prosecuting attorney was from Hong Kong. Whenever he spoke, the judge had a hard time understanding him. To make things worse, the trial and evidence packet composed by the prosecution was a complete mess and did not include an English version. During the opening statement, the lead prosecution attorney decided that he needed to grab his colleague and act out the murder in order to get the message across. This was not pre-planned, and to make a long story short, the judge adjourned about an hour in to postpone the trial in order for the prosecution to, quote, sort out this mess. That was the dumbest thing I've ever seen in a trial, and I can't imagine how desperate the prosecution was to do such a thing. A case where a large gangster-type defendant was accused of slashing the throat of a small, skinny guy. The defense counsel made him wear a large coat to conceal his size, and brought in an interpreter to slowly translate each word of the proceedings because, quote, he had absolutely no understanding of English. 10 minutes into the trial, a cell phone goes off and rings for about a minute. The judge is furious, and the ringing is amplified in the large courtroom. The hearing stops and everyone is looking around trying to figure out where the sound is coming from. Suddenly, the defendant stands up and pulls the phone out of his pocket. It is still ringing, but only louder. The defendant then yells, "Hey judge, I don't know how to turn my phone off." On a hearing regarding a restraining order requested against him, a man raised the defense of, quote, "She be trippin'." Restraining order granted. God bless General Sessions Court. When I was in law school, my school had a mock trial program that took place at the local county court, where the judges were actual judges, prosecutors, and attorneys from the local area. So one day, a mock trial is happening, and one student, who was a law student but not in the mock trial program, is acting as a witness being questioned on the stand. The person was getting a little too rude acting in character, so the judge, who was an actual judge, admonished him to tone it down. The student didn't listen, so the judge took them to a little side chat and told him he really needs to stop. The student blows up at the judge and tells him that he doesn't have to listen to a petty state court judge and proceeded to verbally assault him. Judge filed an assault charge. Student was kicked out of school for damaging the school's relationship with the local courts, and I would imagine likely never got admitted to another law school, or, if they did, would have a hard time passing the character and fitness test to practice law in that state. This is a much longer story, but I'm on mobile. Anyways, a guy came into court on a pervert charge. His friend is a lawyer who comes into court with a black suit, snakeskin boots, and a bolo tie. It is glorious how slimy he looks. When he gets up to talk to the judge, he says, "I've known John for 20 years and he is a good man. He is not a pervert, sir. I should know, because I am one. I miss working for the DA. Sometimes the criminals write themselves." So at the arrest stage, when cautioned, in the UK, any response you give / anything you say under caution is recorded and given as evidence. One of these guys is arrested for a scrap and kicks off in custody, calling us effing this, C-word that. One custody officer goes, "Sir, calm down. You realize everything you say will be recorded and told to the magistrate?" He replied, "Oh, F the magistrate and the frickin' court. The magistrate is a jerk." Court day comes. I'm called to provide evidence to show that the man was badly mannered and aggressive in nature. Amongst other statements and actions he made, I say, "Your worship, whilst in custody, the defendant did not calm, and custody officers' attempts to calm him by warning him that we would provide what he says as evidence to yourself was met with, 'Oh, F the magistrate and their freaking court. The magistrate is a jerk.' Well, that was the end of my evidence, and the court retired for a lunch break. The magistrates went to town on him in sentencing." I only have one. Was in court during a sentencing, and the defendant, not my client, approaches the bench with his attorney. The judge begins to go through the sentencing colloquy, and the man says, "F you, judge." The judge, a female, was pretty shocked and just said, "Excuse me?" I said, "F you, judge. Ain't no woman told me what to do in my life. Sentence me to whatever." She just sat there dumbfounded for a second. Then, "All right, fine, Mr. Blank. I hereby sentence you to life in the penitentiary." Well, that just sounds freaking fantastic. Defendant was already doing a life without parole sentence and had this charge pending when he received his first sentence. He knew he was basically untouchable, and no matter what the judge did, his sentence could never get worse. 2 good stories from arguing motions. 1. I was arguing a case should be dismissed because of a decade-long delay. Sketchy opposing counsel says to me, "Where's your authority to show that delay is long enough?" Judge says, "Right here, case dismissed," and points to his file. Number 2, opposing counsel asked if I was crapping him when I said, despite a typo, the motion could still be granted. I crap you not, he cursed during oral argument. When I was a public defender, I represented a woman in felony DUI trial. It was a felony only because her license was already suspended when she got the DUI. Her BAC was .30, yes, not .03, and there were empty vodka bottles rolling around in her car. I found case law that said the state must prove she actually received notice that her license was suspended in order to charge it as a felony. On my motion after the state's case, again after the defense's case, and again after the jury verdict, the judge grudgingly had to dismiss the felony part because the state couldn't prove the woman ever received notice that her license was suspended. The judge made a very clear record, however, that the conviction for DUI was solid and unaffected by dismissing the felony. Whatever, we beat the felony, which was the difference between 4 months in prison and 24 hours in county jail. That's not the dumb part. This woman was knucking futs and swore she wasn't drunk. Bull crap, she was drunk every time I ever talked to her, and no one would dismiss her case. She filed a lawsuit against the public defender's office, my supervisor personally, me personally, the county superior court, and the judge personally. She would show up at the courthouse every day to, quote, read her file and harass the court staff. The judge eventually barred her from coming to his court without written permission. She started wearing wigs and big hats and sunglasses to skulk around his court unrecognized. No idea what happened to her after that. I swear to drunk I'm not God. We had an expert witness testifying about gunshot residue. He was asked about how long such residue would remain on a given surface. His response, before the court, "Well, I like to say it's like the difference between love and herpes. Herpes lasts forever." A guy was getting sentenced for stealing, and the judge asked him if he had anything to say before the sentence was passed. These are the words he chose to utter. "Your Honor, if I'd known they was watching me, I never would have done it." A guy getting sued for millions for a scam car dealership purchase before retiring to the desert with the scam proceeds showed up on the first day of trial wearing a $50,000 gold watch. His lawyer saw the jury noticing the conspicuous display of wealth and got the guy to ditch the watch, which left him showing a bright white line highlighting his desert tan. The jury was then eyeing him as someone trying to hide his wealth, so to hide the tan line, he showed up on day 2 wearing a $30 Timex. I saw one of the jurors point out his own Timex to his neighbor and shake his head in disgust. Unfortunately, the jury never got to decide that case. They'd have creamed him. Once, I represented a defendant in a defamation case. The plaintiff was crazy and self-represented. He also had a bit of a language barrier and claimed to be a doctor of law in his country of origin. His sentences sounded reasonable, but in an extended conversation, it was clear he was misunderstanding longer words. He was so bad during questioning that I got about 3 different opportunities to cross-examine himself just because his story kept changing. The judge also indicated that I should leave evidence objections to him because there were so many problems with everything he did. At the trial, this man was amazing. I wish my client or I had the money to buy the transcript just for sentimental reasons. One of my favorite exchanges was where he cross-examined my client's witness, who said she had seen the plaintiff yelling at the defendant. What was I saying to her? I don't remember. But you still say I was yelling? Yes, I remembered what you were yelling, but not what words you used. So I was just screaming like this, make screaming noises at the witness, holds his hands up in the air like, got her, and smiled triumphantly at the judge. Another exchange, same trial to my client. So you say you were scared. Yes, you were very aggressive. But why were you scared? You were yelling at me and you're much taller than me. How many people have I killed? What? How many people have I killed that you know of? I don't know. So why would you be scared if you don't know that I've killed anyone? Same triumphant look at the judge. Another time he said to the judge, I didn't threaten her. Don't be silly. In my culture, if I had threatened to kill her, she would be dead. In cross-examination, I asked him whether he had seen a document that had been filed about the case in another court. I told him that the court had made it public. The judge confirmed it was a public document. The plaintiff yelled, Are you saying that you have defamed me too? I also said in closing arguments, Your Honor, it is clear in giving evidence that Mr. Plaintiff had some difficulties with English and did not understand certain words. He may have misinterpreted what my client said. He cannot be relied on for this reason alone. Plaintiff stands up and says, My English is fine. How many African languages does Mr. Rocco know? Tell me. I did the trial pro bono. I don't regret it. Cops of Reddit. What criminal actually fascinated you with their criminal skills? Continually had to interview a man who was repeatedly arrested for running guns. Sometime about my fourth interview with the guy, he explained to me that he earns about $250,000 in 3 months of smuggling them. He inevitably gets caught and was repeatedly sentenced to 9-month stints, 2 years but only served 9 months. He also told me that no one ever seized his funds. They were all done in cash and left in a, quote, safe place. So he said he had a steady job where he made $250,000 for a year's worth of work and will retire in a few more years. Plus, since it was all tax-free and he lived cost-free for his 9 months of incarceration, he was banking it all. Dude basically made my entire life's earnings in 7 or so years, but the guys arresting him thought he was an idiot. Edit, holy crap, this blew up. I'm currently at work and won't get into too much detail. This is a 100% true story and feel many don't understand that 3 strikes is a commonly misunderstood law. The defendant must have been prior sentenced to serious or violent felonies. This isn't generally, depending on the gumption of the DA, applicable. Most cases get pled out to more minor offenses in sentencing. This man never took it to the box. Unless they have done what we call the Dirty 30, they will usually be eligible for a plea if the strike is dropped. I am not a beat cop, nor was I a beat cop when I met this guy. I was not seeking any charges against him, merely a cog in the bigger wheel. We don't often catch the smart ones. They live in mansions in Bogota. We catch the low-hanging idiot fruit, but sometimes the idiot fruit can become useful. There are many dynamics to law enforcement beyond someone's mail getting stolen and domestic violence calls. I've met way more impressive people, but this guy fit the question asked. Back in an earlier part of life, when I was a cop in Baltimore's Western District, our sector had been getting hit with weird commercial burglaries that owners couldn't figure out how they were happening. Alarms weren't going off, and owners were showing up to ransack shops. We drove a lot of back alleys and walked a lot of foot for months trying to catch this guy. Eventually, one winter midnight shift, we caught up to him. He finally hit a place that had motion alarms as well as entry alarms and triggered it. It was about 3 a.m. and had been snowing lightly for a couple of hours. We got to the place in less than a minute, and the cop who took the back alley saw this dude running down the alley with about a half a block head start. He took after him, radioed, and we all started converging. By the time we all got back there and had closed off the ends of the alleys in the block, nobody could find this guy anywhere. That's okay, it was snowing. We're walking along, following tracks in the snow in the alley, and they turn into a side alley and stop at the dead end. We looked at each other confused and start shining flashlights around. My side partner says, "Mother freaking Spider-Man." We look, and he's got the guy in his light, about 15 feet up against the buildings. He had wedged himself into the corner of 2 buildings and pressed his arms/hands and legs and feet out against the 2 walls and used isometric pressure at that 90-degree angle to lift himself up and stay wedged up there, just looking down at us, like some free-climbing mountaineer. He came down and got locked up. After interviewing him, over the course of days and weeks, a bunch of us went back to old burglary locations from the past few months and found where he had gotten in through roof access points. Dude was wiry and strong as heck. Skittered up the sides of buildings in that same isometric counterpressure kind of way if he couldn't find any easier access. Not a cop, but I remember a neighbor of mine having their bike, or was it barbecue, stolen, then returned the next day, along with an apology note stating that the thief had really needed it for the night, along with several apology tickets to a local sporting event, CFL football, for the family. When they went to the game, the thief and thieves came back and robbed the house. A guy in our local jail wanted to escape. Now, our jail is pretty much escape-proof if you are behind bars, but not so much if you are a trustee bringing food into the kitchen or going to court or going to the hospital, etc. So this guy went to the hospital for a problem, and halfway from the doctor's office to the car, there was a bathroom in the hallway. He told the guards he had to go, they escort him in, he pees, then back to jail. He tells this to his girlfriend. She dresses up as a dude, goes to that same bathroom, removes the hockey puck from the urinal and drops a hacksaw blade down the drain and attaches the blade by fishing wire back to the puck. Next time he goes to the hospital, he goes to that same urinal. The guards are standing right there, but there is a urinal screen, so it looks like he is shaking out the last drop, but in fact is reeling in the blade. Back to the jail. A hacksaw blade isn't enough to get through all the steel in the jail, but it is enough to make a hole in a window where he now went into the business of reeling drugs up from the ground with the fishing line. I had a guy that was IT for a mid-sized company. He set up fake vendor accounts that went to his Google Wallet. He then would make fake invoices for the fake company for software licenses, and the company would pay a monthly subscription fee, and the guy would pocket it. He never got caught. The scam snowballed to the point if he stopped, someone would notice. So he confessed to the CEO and had minimal prison time and had to pay it back. Remember, Brenda from accounting is going to pay whatever is on her desk. Edit. IT and accounting can get together and rob you blind. Keep Brenda and Jed away from each other. I worked in the jail for a short time before working patrol, and as such, I knew quite a few of her clients. A year or two into patrol, about 10 years ago, I am walking to my car, which is parked on a city street after a call, and my keys are locked in the car. A client, who I remembered as always being rather funny, comes off his front porch, asks if I need help, and in less than 5 seconds, he had my door open in one movement. He and his friends, and I, just started laughing. I threw him a fist bump, and that was the end. Now, I have a whole kit to get into cars for emergencies like babies trapped inside. I've practiced and tried to be good with it. I've also called unknown amounts of tow trucks to help people. I've watched locksmiths work. Nobody held a candle to this guy. Side note, client really cleaned up his life and owns a small but decent mechanic shop now. It's pretty nice to see. My dad is a cop. He once had a guy run a red light at 2 a.m. The guy then stopped at the next light for about 3 minutes as it went through its cycles. My dad pulled him over and asked why he waited so long. The guy said since he ran the red light, he thought he should stop extra long at the next one. Edit. My dad also has a rule that says if you make him laugh, he won't give you a ticket. No ticket was issued that night. 2 local guys walked into Canadian Tire and just casually walked out of store with a full-size canoe. Who would ever question that bold move? Got caught when they went back in for the oars. I watched a Travel Channel program on casino thieves. One of the most successful was a sleight-of-hand guy at the roulette table. His gimmick was he'd put 2 chips on a roulette number. When he won, the dealer, spinner, I don't know, I'll just say dealer, looks at his 2 chips and says, okay, 20 times 35 is $700. No, the guy would say, and he'd flip over the top chip. It wasn't 2 $10 chips, it was a $10 chip on top of a $1,000 chip. The casino would call their pit bosses and their security team and analyze footage from a dozen different security cameras pointed at the table and the surrounding tables. All of them would show that the guy and everyone at the table never touched his chips. It was physically impossible for him to make a switch. What he did was sketchy, but it wasn't against the rules. Finally, reluctantly, they would give him his $35,350. Turns out he was switching chips. He had 2 people working with him to watch and distract the dealer and the pit boss. He was an expert at it. He would bet $1,010 every round and switch out the $1,000 chip every time he lost. He realized that casino security won't scrutinize every $20 loss. Not a cop, but I always liked this guy. Richard Lee McNair. Quote from the Wikipedia article. After McNair's arrest, he escaped 3 times from 3 different institutions using various creative methods. On his first attempt, he used lip balm to squeeze out of a pair of handcuffs. He escaped a second time by crawling through a ventilation duct. In his last escape from a federal prison in April 2006, he mailed himself out of prison in a crate. Not a cop, but look up the Banco Rio robbery in Argentina. That was some fine robbing. They enter the bank from the front door, everyone on the ground, demand the bank vault to be open. They get in and close the door. Police arrive and start to negotiate through telephone calls. Negotiation lasts for hours as they threaten to kill everyone in the bank. Police finally go in, enter the vault, and it was empty. No money, no people. An hour later, they find behind a cabinet a hole in the wall. The hole led to the sewage system that ended up straight to the river. They put a boat in the sewage and escaped through the river. They got caught because the wife of the gang leader turned him in because of a fight they had. The money never appeared. Have y'all seen that show called Money Heist? That's its English name. The Spanish name is Casa de Papel. I think this event is what inspired the show. It's about this group of criminals that all get together and rob a bank. But what sets it apart is that it goes into each person's life, and drama unfolds as tensions and relationships form between all the characters. Highly recommend if you have Netflix. I had a shoplifter hitting the Walmart for TVs. He would go into the store, put a TV in the cart, and go to customer service. He would request a refund for the television. To wit, the customer service employee told him he needed a receipt. He would proceed to get agitated to the point where security would come over and escort him and the TV back to his car. Away he would go. He took 3 local Walmarts for almost 20 TVs. Sometimes, it's the simple strategy that's the best. My coworker back in the day used to work at a bank. He would copy checks and cash them. He was almost at $1 million when his girlfriend got mad at him and snitched. He would be sitting on a bench somewhere if it wasn't for her. Lesson, people. The only people that should know of your crime are the ones you commit it with. r/unethical life pro tips. Couple of idiots tried to steal an ATM, chained it up to the back of an old 1975 Chrysler New Yorker, weren't looking, and it rolled into a convenience store front window. Left the ATM, and as the alarms for the store were going off, made off with 50+ cartons of cigarettes. Got pulled over on a highway because one of them had to pee. Not a cop, but worked with police after I was mugged. Basically, this young, really sweet-looking couple would mug or pickpocket people, go to the bank of the victim, and one of them would claim that his/her wallet had been stolen, and they had no money to get a new ID and needed ID to get a bank card. The sympathetic banker would buy the story and help them get a new debit card under the victim's account. They were super charismatic and memorized all the other information they could find from the wallet: full name, address, sometimes actual numbers from the bank card. Apparently in my case, the guy showed up with my credit card saying he had canceled it by mistake as he thought it had been in his wallet when it was stolen. The banker gave him a new credit card and a debit card for my account. This happened to me 4 years ago, and they were still going strong this year. The only reason they were caught was because I happened to be at a bank, saw them pulling this crap, and recognized them from when they mugged me. It's not the crime of the century, but at the college I was a cop at, we had a phantom pooper. Somebody would, at night, take a dump on the floor next to the toilet. And we get a call about crap on the floor and basically be like, well, I'm not cleaning it up, call a janitor. Eventually, after it happened a few times, we started paperwork on it. I have no idea why. We were never going to catch the guy, or girl. This went on for years. Not every night, not even every week, but often enough that I'd always get a chuckle out of it. Last time it happened was 3 days before my last day there, and I left satisfied that the mystery pooper was still hard at work. Edit, lovely. My most upvoted comment is about poop now. I feel like I've accomplished something today. Edit number 2. It still happens. I keep in touch with coworkers, and they still find poop every once in a while. So, it didn't stop when I left, so no, it wasn't me.
I am the one who defecates in the night. I am the grunt in your stall, the splash in your toilet, the stench in your bathroom. I am the Phantom Pooper!
Ex-deputy sheriff here. Before I attended PED Academy and was able to become a road deputy, I worked corrections. One of the smartest people in that facility I've ever dealt with was a man on the second story of the tower I'll call Inmate X. X would spend most of his days in his cell, quote, asleep. He never went out in the pod, he never brought a lot of attention to himself. He just seemed like the typical guy who made an honest mistake and wanted to sleep his time away and go home. About a month after we received X, he had to elevate the security level of another inmate in his cell. 5 bunks per cell, 20 cells per pod, because we found metal in his rack. 2 more months go by, and X now has less than 90 days left of his initial 180-day sentence. Suddenly, an alert goes off in the pod. A deputy triggered his radio for backup when he went in the pod to find all but one of the 87 inmates high off their butts, having taken acid tabs smuggled in the jail in clear wrap. After we shook the pod down and searched for more, all we found was that inmate X was the only one who hadn't taken any drugs because he was asleep. He had established a pattern of this, so we believed him. 2 days later, another alert goes up. This time, everyone but X had taken some Molly and the pod broke out in a happy dance/cuddling frenzy. 3 days after that, the court sent us over a copy of their security footage. They're across the street from the jail. As we watch the highlighted segment, we see a red coupe pull up outside the jail, a white cloth falls from the second-story window, a woman exits the car, loads the cloth, and it's hoisted back up. This absolutely blew our minds. No way could it be possible, because the windows were reinforced glass and steel mesh surrounded by bars. But as we ran up to the second story, we inspected every window, couldn't find any traces of tampering. About a week passed, then the courts called over to us, the red coupe is back, and we all rushed to the pod to finally catch X out of bed, having skillfully removed the sealant in the window in a fashion where it wouldn't break, and was using a handmade system of his underwear and some string from his blanket to hoist the drugs up through the hole. That day, we busted him with cocaine rocks. The driver of the coupe turned out to be his girlfriend, and she was arrested. Our minds were blown at how clever he was to do it the way he did, right under our noses. He was sentenced to 45 years in prison, and his girlfriend received 25 years. 45 years? When he had 90 days left? The homies just wanted to cuddle, man. I'm not a police officer, apologies, but I will say, I once briefly had a coworker who was an accomplished con man. The guy lied about everything, constantly and convincingly, and was also stealing equipment. He was in the IT department, to sell. Eventually, though, people called BS on the lies that the owner realized this wasn't just standard griping, but that the guy was serious trouble. The guy fascinated me, though. So much lying, so much effort to present false images of himself, that he had a PhD, that he was a naval aviator, that he was a scuba diver. I did a bunch of searching for him online around the time he was fired and found threads in and online BMW enthusiast groups where he ran a big scam selling parts he never delivered, then made an appearance as his own twin brother to sell the story that he himself had been shot down over Iraq and therefore couldn't deliver the parts he'd been paid for. Anyway, it was just the weirdest thing to me. People I respect who worked directly with him said he actually had the knowledge and skills to do the job he was hired for, which was, I'm sure, a pretty good paying IT gig. But instead, he half-baked it and got busy stealing equipment. He was fired, then not long after arrested and sent to prison for selling prescriptions to people in his capacity as a fake MD. I had the discussion with a good friend who also worked there at the time. I'd argue, there has to be something really weird wrong with him, right? Something off with his brain or something? A mental illness, or something with drug and alcohol abuse? While my friend would say, no, he's just a piece of crap con man. There are people who do it for a living. They're out there. Anyway, sorry for butting into your thread, but this guy still fascinates me, though from a far distance. I worked at a radio station for a while, and the news reporter listened to the police scanner constantly. She told me to come into her office and listen to this chase going down. The cops were on a high-speed chase down back roads following a car thief. This guy was taking these curves and hills at 90, and it was a 5-speed sports car. But eventually, he took a sharp curve too fast and flipped the car multiple times into a field. He got out of the car completely unharmed and fled, stole another truck at a farm, and drove it close to his home, walked to his house, and went to bed. The police were shocked at how good of a driver he was, being that he was only 17. He was arrested, and in his mugshot, he had his collar popped up and this smirk on his face like, I'm so freaking cool right now. I know what he did was wrong, and he could have killed himself or someone else, but that mugshot will always stay with me. If he doesn't go into NASCAR, I'll be disappointed. Mall in my old neighborhood was under renovations. Thieves built a facade and placed it over the night deposit slot for the bank with the sign, sorry for the inconvenience, temporary night deposit. Every store except one put the day's cash in it, plus other businesses in the area put their cash in. Thieves came back late at night, took the facade and sign, plus the money, and disappeared into the night. They were never caught, and estimates of the amount of cash were well over $100,000. Not a cop, but a friend of mine was in jail with an actual jewel thief. Apparently, before the actual robbery, he would case the place as a potential customer looking for an engagement ring for his made-up fiancée, put a hidden camera somewhere in the store aimed at the security pad, and then leave. Over the next 3 to 7 days, he would determine the schedule of the employees and the security code to turn off the alarm. Once he was confident he had an accurate idea of both, he would go back shortly before closing, put a down payment on a ring or put it on layaway, and then spend some time talking to the employee and using some impressive sleight of hand to get the key to the jewelry case off of their keyring without them noticing. Once he had that key, he was ready. The following morning, around 3 hours before opening, he would go back to the store, pick the front lock, and then put in the security code to turn off the alarm. Then he would open the jewelry cases with the key he had snagged from the employee, take all the jewelry he could, and walk out. The only reason he was caught was because the manager of the last store he tried to rob was in the middle of a divorce and sleeping in his car in the parking lot, so he saw it happening and called the cops. The cops connected him to the other robberies and told him he could tell them where his stash was and get 8 years or do a full 16. He chose the 16 years. He has millions in jewelry stashed away, so once he is out, he's set if he can make a clean getaway. Reddit. What's your best, no time to explain, let's go story? I'll start. Happened back when I was 16 to 17. Was hanging late one night at an out-of-the-way basketball court with 3 of my very attractive female friends. We were just shooting some hoops and talking when someone suggested a game of strip basketball. The 3 girls wanted to be on a team together, so they told me I could go choose anyone I wanted for my second. Naturally, I bolted for my high school's basketball team captain's house. Pounded on his door at 10 p.m., sweating and out of breath, and said, "No time to explain, let's go." I didn't know him very well, and he had no reason to go with me, but we were both happy he did. The girls weren't happy with my choice, but they kept their word, and we got a nice show. Your turn. A few years back, my brother pulled up to my house with a paintball gun and told me to get in. He hands me the gun and says, "You'll know when to shoot." We go on a short drive to a corner where some kids began to egg his truck. I knew when to shoot. My archaeology crew and I were stuck in La Paz, Bolivia because of civil unrest that cut the roads leading to our dig site. We had been hanging out in La Paz for 2 weeks, trying to stay as warm as possible and waiting for any opening in the demonstrations. The Bolivian army fired into a crowd, killing several demonstrators, and both sides called a truce for 24 hours. That morning, our professor ran into our rented apartment and yelled for us to grab all our gear. We have 5 minutes to leave. We had no idea what was going on. The prof took the next combi, and my poor Spanish skills meant I couldn't ask questions of my fellow passengers. We boarded one of the first combis out of La Paz and headed out to the Altiplano. On the road, we passed huge roadblocks, burning tires, piles of broken glass, and various debris with just enough room for a small car to make it through. We made it far enough to hike the remaining 12 hours to the site next day, and then we started digging. Went to a bar with some friends and my parents in my hometown for my 21st birthday. Turns into a good 6 hours of drinking. Went to the bathroom, and while closing the lid after finishing, the entire bottom of the bowl shatters. I was legally drunk for my first time at said bar, and proceeded to urge very loudly that we needed to leave. "No, I don't think you understand. I destroyed a toilet. Let's go." A group of bigots named Homo Sex is Sin visit Georgia Tech about every year to tell everyone why gays will burn in hell, women engineers are witches, blah blah blah. When I saw they were in front of the student center, I ran back to my place to find my camera and stereo. My friend was passed out right next to both items, still hungover from the night previous. I shook him and said, "Put on the smallest boxers you own and follow me." This is what happened. What follows is a link to a video where the 2 men are dancing in their smallest boxers in front of the bigots, set to techno music as a crowd cheers them on. Godspeed, you beautiful people. When I was 8, my parents took me over to their friend's house for an early dinner party. They had a daughter my age who was also my friend. She was really into animals and nature, so she wanted me to go with her about a block down her street to investigate a bird's nest she saw earlier in a tree. We go, she starts climbing while I'm on the ground watching. Then, about half a block away, this hippie-looking surfer dude with long blonde hair and wearing nothing but shorts walks out of his house and notices us. I notice him for about 2 seconds and then look back up in the tree at my friend. Next, I hear a loud whistle, and when I look back in the direction of the surfer dude, he has his shorts down around his ankles with his willy whacker out in all its glory. I yell, "Run!" My friend is clueless, but somehow she manages to jump out of the tree and we run back to her house as fast as our pint-sized legs would carry us. Luckily, my dad and her dad were right inside, and when I yelled, "There's a naked man chasing us," they were outside almost immediately. They find the surfer dude standing right in front of their driveway. I remember my dad saying, "Hey man, are you pulling your pants down in front of children?" And the guy responding with something like, "Screw you, man," and then walking away. The amazing thing is that we called the cops and they came over to file a report, but they recommended not pressing charges because the guy knew where we lived and might seek revenge. This was back in the mid-1970s. Hurricane Charlie was going to do a normal ride out the storm situation and play video games and eat junk food all weekend while it rained outside. I got a call from a buddy who said the hurricane just turned 90 degrees and made landfall in Sanibel, like 20 to 25 miles away. I rushed into my roommate's room and said, "Grab 2 days worth of clothes. We're getting the heck out of here." When we came back to the house, it had been destroyed. The roof leaked and held water in the ceiling until it completely caved in, completely destroying everything we had in there. Not sure if this counts, but I was in high school and espied a hot girl waiting for the bus. Being me and knowing I would just awkward all over myself if I tried things the normal way, I got on my best panicked face, ran up to her, and said, "Quick, quick, there's no time, I need your phone number." She blurted it out. I actually kept it in my head until I could get it down on paper and called her that night. We've been together for 13 years. I own a skate shop, and it was also a popular hangout for skater kids. I was off one day, and I get a call from an ecstatic skate kid that sounded in panic saying, "Get to the shop now!" Click. I rushed down there 2 minutes later. Anthony Kiedis walks into the shop. One of the kids had run into him in town and convinced him to come into the shop. All the skater kids are in my shop behind the counter with my employee, pretending to work on things, put skateboards together, etc. It was hilarious to see them try to act naturally, and we all got to have a good conversation with Anthony Kiedis about skating, paddleboarding, and kiteboarding. He signed a girl's skate deck for our wall of fame that I still have. He's been back every year since then and is a regular customer. This past summer, I delivered paddleboards out to his vacation home. For the uninformed like I was before I read this post, Anthony Kiedis is the lead singer of Red Hot Chili Peppers. And now, it's time for a pheasant tangent. Got a phone call from my sister one evening, and when I picked up the phone, she was clearly running and out of breath. I could just make out her saying, "Open the front door," before the line went dead. So I ran to the front door, picking up the heaviest thing I could find along the way. It was a climbing helmet. Wrenched the door open and moved out the way just in time to see her bolting into the house past me. I slammed the door and wait for her to catch her breath. There was a giant pheasant chasing me all the way from Tesco. "Don't worry, ma'am. I've got this." With that, I donned the climbing helmet and told her to call the police if I wasn't back in 5 minutes. When I was a kid, my village had an evil jerk of a pheasant that would chase old ladies down the street. You could look out of the window and it will be strutting around the village square waiting for a pensioner to attack. Anyway, one day I was out in the garden with my dad, who was plucking a dead pheasant, and this devil bird jumped up onto the high fence and looked at us. I'm not kidding when I say it had the craziest look in its eye. I asked my dad to use my water pistol to blast it, so he pumped it to full power and shot the pheasant in the chest. This crazy bird just gripped the fence for the entire time it was being savaged by the jet of water from my Super Soaker 2000. It didn't fall off and only flew off of its own accord about 10 minutes later. Then a day later I saw it dead in the road. When I was about 13, my buddy and I rode our bikes to the local Kmart to be bored, obnoxious teenagers. Real quick, this story is from 11 years ago, so oh my god, I feel old now. Anyway, tossed some Nerf footballs over the aisles, ran around, mocked things. Then I thought it would be funny to spray my buddy with the perfume sample. He didn't think it was funny at all and started chasing me. I ran and hid, and the hunt was on. Using his finest ninja skills, he snuck around until he saw me, crouched down in the hardware aisle. He crept up behind me, put his butt right next to my head, and let rip. He turned around to gloat, and it wasn't me. Just some poor schmuck looking at hammers. The next thing I know, he runs by me. We gotta go, we gotta go, we gotta go. I was in high school, and my friend came running up to me and said, "No time to explain. I need your shoes." I spent the rest of the day walking around the school in socks and some makeshift shoes made out of a cardboard box. I later found out that the reason why my friend needed my shoes was so that he could participate in his chem lab class and not fail due to his not wearing shoes. Me and my friend are heading to Sonic for lunch. Suddenly he screams, "Pull over!" pointing across the road and across 2 lanes of traffic. Why? No time to explain. Go! So I hit the gas and barely avoid getting creamed. Across the way, I see what he noticed first, a man holding down a woman in the dirt near the ditch beside the road and striking her. We start to get out, he sees us, lets her go, and gets in his car. A moment later, another car pulls up and some older women swarm over the struck woman as he begins to drive away. We hop in our car and give chase. I hand him my phone, he calls the cops. We end up leading the way on a car chase with officers slowly assembling en masse behind us. Finally, we chase him to a house and block the driveway with our car as he gets out and runs behind the house. Knowing we have no right to chase, we let the police take it from there, but we checked the car. It had kids in it. The police interviewed us later, told us that the kids belonged to the woman, and if we hadn't followed the man, they might not have found the car. Felt like big heroes. Best part was, on the way home, we helped a fellow with a broken radiator, and in the middle of getting him taken care of, the police called us after they caught him, and I got to say this awesome line. "Bro, that was Officer X. They need us down at the station." Broken radiator guy was all, "Who are you?" My brother is 11 years older than me and stayed with my dad with my parents divorced, so I never really got to live with him when we were young. When I was about 14, he barged into my room at 4 a.m. and told me to pack your crap for 4 days. Our flight leaves in 2 hours. Soon after, I was on a plane. Turns out he had planned us a trip to Colorado to go snowboarding and told no one but my mom 1 hour before he told me. My dad, working in the World Trade Center, heard a huge crash several floors above him. Boss looks at him and says, "No time. Let's go." He lived. About 11 or 12 years ago, I was taking my dog for a walk in the forest behind the local elementary school. He seemed all anxious to get off leash, so I unleash him since I figure he wants to run around and pee on everything. The moment I let him off leash, he starts barking at me. In hindsight, my best guess is what he was trying to convey was, "No time to explain, let's go." And then he bolts. I'm ticked off and start chasing after him, but he was fast, even by dog standards. Turns out on the other side of the woods, there was a middle-aged guy who had exposed himself to a group of young girls. They ran away screaming, and he was trying to make a grab for one of them. It was at this moment that my dog came bursting out of the woods like Lassie or Rin Tin Tin or some crap. My dog was popular among the kids, so they knew him. They screamed his name and ran towards him. The pedo bailed, with his Johnson still hanging out of his pants. I was fully prepared to reprimand my dog for being a jerk. Then I found out what happened. He got steak for dinner. Freshman year in college at a school in Boston. Sick as a dog. Newfound ROTC friend with similar taste as myself comes running into my room and tells me he needs me. I tell him I'm sick and can't go anywhere. He refuses my denial and forces me to come with him. Flash forward 45 minutes in a car, and we are arriving at Gillette Stadium. Turns out there is a Halo 3 tournament being held for Army recruitment purposes. He is very aware of my Halo skills due to the sleepless nights we spent when Halo 3 first came out. Ended up placing second, and along the way beating Jared Mayo. He was physically upset and said he wanted to kill me. Felt awesome to beat a professional football player at something. All of this occurred in the box seating of an empty stadium, which we have an amazing view of. So surreal. Army recruitment via Halo 3? Are we fighting the Flood? Is Area 51 home to the Flood?
Wake up, sheeple! The government is hiding aliens under our freaking noses!
My wife and I went to Scandinavia in the winter for our honeymoon. First Copenhagen, then Helsinki, then northern Finland. Yes, this is an odd choice. Our flight got diverted, and en route to Copenhagen, our luggage, including all of our winter gear, was lost, and the airline was unable to locate it for the 4 days we were in Copenhagen. However, we made friends with one of the customer service agents at the airport. We returned to the airport on the day of our flight to Helsinki, still with no luggage, and dreading the Arctic cold we were about to fly into. Temperatures were in the single digits in Finland, but unable to do anything about it. Magically, we found our luggage at the airport that morning and went through security to our gate. It was about half an hour before boarding when our friend from customer service on the other side of the airport ran out to us and said, "Follow me and don't ask any questions. We don't have much time and there is something I must do for you." Then he led us through a series of back hallways in the airport to his office. "What I'm about to tell you, you must tell no one else," he said. "In 20 minutes, our pilots are going to announce a strike, and all our flights will be grounded." This was in no way public knowledge. He put us on another flight to Helsinki with a different airline, and we watched in gratitude and amazement from the Finnair terminal as the strike was announced, and our original flight, along with every single other SAS flight leaving Copenhagen, was grounded. Epilogue: we found ourselves in Copenhagen again a year later, and we went to the airport specifically to try and find our friend and thank him, but it was his day off. I'd ask Reddit to pass on my thanks, but I'm pretty sure what he did was against company policy, and I wouldn't want to get him in trouble for doing a good deed for a young couple. I was at a house party over the summer that started going a bit south, so my friend and I decided to just get in the car and drive home. We got to the car and were waiting for the third guy in our group when a very, very drunk guy came up with his red solo cup of beer. We were friendly to him, asked him what he was drinking and all. He decided the best reaction to this was to throw the beer at me while I sat in the car. After this happened, I noticed a group of about 7 or 8 more drunk people ambling towards the car. They did not look happy. My friend decided the best response to this was to go to the back of his car, grab his shotgun and 2 shells. Oh crap. He stood next to his car with the drunk people slowly approaching and yelled at them once, "Get away from my car," while loading the shells. They did not stop. He fired once into the air away from them, cocked the gun, and said again, "Get away from my car." About a third of them left after that, so he fired once more and the rest scattered. He had just fired a gun at a house party. Twice. Oh crap, oh crap, oh crap. Our friend then came out of the house screaming. No time to explain, let's go. We never went back to that house. TLDR, nearly drunken brawl broken up by shotgun. Walking home from playing football in the park, and my dad, aggressively speeding down the road in his car, brakes hard next to me. He looks angry as heck, and my little brother is crying, and he sternly says, "Get in." I roll with it, and he speeds around the park looking attentively out the window. My little brother points at a group of lads, maybe 16 to 17 years old. One of them is running with my little brother's glasses. He's only about 10 years old. My dad jumps out of the car, rugby tackling the lad to the floor. My dad is huge, and the lads look petrified. My dad absolutely bawls at them for about 5 minutes, and after that, he gets back in the car, and then we go to McDonald's. Dads out there listening to this right now, if you aren't willing to body slam someone for your kid, what are you doing with your life? I was at a sporting event with some friends. Wow, it was 10 years ago. Now I feel old. The bleachers were metal benches on concrete and set up amphitheater style, going down a hill and all the concessions and bathrooms on the top of the hill behind us. It's about halftime and I'm thirsty. I also see that it's starting to cloud up. I tell my friends I'm gonna go grab a drink and be right back. I walk to the top of the stairs and I see the biggest, nastiest thundercloud I have ever seen, and it's about to crap bricks right on top of us. I hauled it down the stairs, grab the friend closest to the aisle and yell, "We gotta go." It takes a second for it to register, but everyone grabs the important stuff and then follows me up the stairs, across the food court and into the bathroom. Suddenly, the temperature drops by at least 10 degrees. The wind gusts. The last friend in almost lost her hat. Seconds later, we hear a huge clang on the tin roof of the bathroom. And then another, and then another. Then out the door, we see golf ball to orange-sized hail everywhere. TLDR, I saved my friends from being caught in bleachers in a nasty hailstorm. It was the middle of the night on a road trip with a friend. She's a city mouse, I'm country. I was driving, she was sleeping, and I started to get sleepy. So I pulled off the highway onto a barely paved road and followed it for a while until I found a wide shoulder to pull off. I parked and we got out so she could have a cigarette. There were loads of stars and we leaned against the car having one of those hushed middle-of-the-night conversations. Then, I heard rustling in the woods 8 feet from us. At first I ignored it, but then I realized there was a pattern. I'd hear it at the 10 position, then at 2, then back to 10. It was more than one thing making the rustling noise, and they were getting closer. And I realized something was hunting us. So I put on my power voice and told her, "Get in the car." Her eyes got wide and she hopped in really quick. I jumped in and we took off back to the highway. She turned to me and asked, "Was it an axe murderer or something?" I told her no, it was probably wolves. And she got mad at me for scaring her. She didn't see how wild animals stalking us could possibly be dangerous. doing some bodywork on a Cessna 350 when my buddy comes running into the shop with his eyes nearly bugging out of his head. "Goldfish, come on, follow me!" "What is it? I'm busy." "Just come here. I have to finish this work. Is it important?" "Just follow me. It's important." "I'm not going unless you tell me what it is first." "Cake!" Turns out it was somebody's birthday at work and there was free cake in the break room. If somebody could take that cake soundbite and turn it into Space Core from Portal, I would love you forever. So, I had a job driving a taxi, night shift. I'm waiting in the cab lineup for my next fare when a native Indian stumbles up to my taxi, asks me if I want to buy some beer. "No thanks, pal." "You sure? I'll sell you a case for $15. Keep in mind, I'm in Canada, and a case will normally cost around $40. I say sure, and he hops in and tells me to drive around the corner to the golf course. I'm skeptical, but I go for it. We arrive, and he runs into some bushes and comes out with a 24-pack of beer. I laugh, pay him, and ask if there's more. "Yeah, if you buy 10, I'll sell them to you for $10 each." I gave him $190 more. He runs towards the bushes, looks back at me and yells, "Well, you gonna come help me with them or what?" I follow him to the bushes, and there is a skid full of cases of beer. We take 19 more and load them into the back of my taxi van. I get the nice gentleman's phone number for next time, and we say our goodbyes. Fast forward 15 minutes. I've driven home. It's 3 a.m. I was living in a house in a row of townhomes. Neighbors surely hear me pull up, open and slam my door. I run in, wake up my roommate, and yell, "No time to explain, let's go." He rushes downstairs, puts on shoes, and follows me back to the cab. I open the rear doors and his jaw drops. "Where did you find this?" "No time to explain," I respond. So, here we are, my half-naked friend and I running 20 cases of beer from the street to my house at 3 a.m. I am amazed that no neighbors had awoken and looked out their windows and called the phone number on the van. When we finished and I had time to explain, my roommate gave me $200 and we went and got another 20 cases, this time from a skid hidden behind some trees at a park on a local lake. TLDR, bought 20 cases of beer from an Indian, woke up roommate at 3 a.m. to help rush it into our house. We built a wall between our kitchen and living room with cases of said beer. Just saw a mother walk into a classroom with a handheld radiation meter and proceed to tell the teacher that little Billy needs to sit in the back corner of the classroom because of the toxic school Wi-Fi radiation. What other insane things have you seen/heard of that these helicopter moms do? Joke's on her when I tell her that visible light is also quote-unquote toxic radiation. Maybe she'll go back to whatever cave she crawled out of, this time with their lights turned out. What I don't get here is that mom was perfectly happy with other children getting killed by the supposedly lethal radiation. Surely, if she was so confident it was toxic, she would have nobly saved the whole class by getting them out of there. But I guess she believes Wi-Fi is toxic, so logic should not be expected. I work in HR at a large telecommunications company. We usually sit in the conference room and can see/hear the interview candidates while they are waiting in the lobby. This poor guy was probably 19 or 20, and his mother wanted to go into the interview with him. We actually had to ask her to wait outside the lobby because even after being asked to sit down, she said it was her, quote, right to be in there. WTF? Guy didn't end up getting the job, and she later called and asked where she could send an appeal letter. Wish I had saved that letter. It was intense. I made a really great friend in high school. He and I were as thick as thieves. Early on in the friendship, my parents took us to a movie. I don't remember the movie, but the start of it got delayed by technical difficulties by about 20 minutes. My parents called from their cell to let my friend's mother know, but only got the voicemail. Thinking that would suffice, we all proceeded to have a good time. Fast forward to the end of the movie, my mom turns her cell phone on and discovers her voicemail box is suddenly full. 20, I believe, was her limit. All of them were my friend's mother calling, pleading for us to return her son, and she would pay any amount we demanded, and that if we called back soon, she wouldn't go to the police. She literally had thought we kidnapped him. Suffice to say, when we got home only 20 minutes later than planned, the conversation was rather awkward. My dad figured out exactly how long it took to walk home from school. As in, literally walked it himself, and then gave me exactly that long to get home every day. If I was more than 5 minutes late, I got a beating for, quote, screwing around. Then they got mad that I had no friends, and after a protracted argument and fight, I got an extra 15 minutes to make friends after school. That winter, I got in a snowball fight and was having fun and didn't realize I'd gone a little too long. So dear old dad drove to my school and started wandering around, bellowing my name until he found me. That was a blast. I believe this is the year after he stood in front of my entire class and told them to start being nice to me. I'm so glad I change schools every year. That sucks. I know the feeling though. My friends almost never wanted to come to my house, and I pretty much blame it on my folks. My dad was just an embarrassment, blew up on me for having friends over once, and told me I couldn't have anyone in the house unless I asked. This was in front of my friends, whom I had known for years and whom were also let in my house by my mother right before she went to work. Then there were 2 instances where I asked if some friends could spend the night, got what was basically a yes, and then they ended up having to leave because my mother said that since she didn't talk to their parents, again, the first instance were people I had known for years, it would be considered kidnapping. Then the second time, my dad barged into the room, screamed at me, and called my friends bums to their faces, telling them they had to leave. Needless to say, I didn't have many visitors over, and my social life was almost non-existent. There was a girl in my 5th grade class whose mother would take an hour out of her day to come supervise recess. Every 5 minutes, she'd blow a whistle and go, "Emmy, it's time for your shade break." And, just like clockwork, Emmy would have to go sit in the shade for 5 minutes. This crap got really annoying when we would play team sports. No one wanted Emmy on their team. Went to a play group for children with special needs involved with infant development. Talked to a mom after I noticed that she wouldn't let her son off the mat he was playing on, chit-chatting, all the while she was stopping her kid from going off the mat. When I said something along the lines of, "Wow, your son really wants off that mat," she replied deadpan with, "Well, he was a preemie, so I got to protect him from the world." My daughter is blind, has albinism and nystagmus. She was rolling, yelping, and climbing up everything like a spider monkey. Ugh. When I worked at a coffee shop with the most helium-like, whiny freaking voice imaginable, came and ordered a 7-step customized drink and threw a fit when we just asked her to repeat it.
"Oh no! Am I the bad guy? I'm sorry! I thought you'd be able to speak English!"
Then she goes, in the same whiny, begging voice,
"Can my son have a job?"
I hand her a job application.
"He already sent one in! Can you just hire him? Hey! I don't want whipped cream on that!" "So, can he have a job?"
I tell her if he's sent an application, he'll get a call when the manager looks through the stack. We had like 20 applications at any given point.
So he's just gonna be one in the pile? Yeah, that's not gonna work. He's a great kid. Just freaking hire him.
Just to get rid of her, I wrote down her son's name and say I'll look into it. I hand her her drink and she leaves. My manager, who heard her screeching voice from the back room, immediately calls me over to see that kid's name. He digs through the pile of applications and immediately shreds the kid's application. His only words, "If we hire him, his mother is going to be here all the time." I once interviewed someone for an entry-level job. The next day, I got a follow-up call from his mother. This kid had not made the cut. He didn't interview confidently and didn't enunciate very well. Not good for a call center job. But I hadn't passed that on to HR yet. I told this woman a little white lie though. I informed her that he had been in the running, but since he can't be counted on to do his own follow-up, he's clearly not the kind of employee I want. When I was in high school, I would go teach French to elementary school children with a few friends of mine. I used to do magic tricks for the kids because they would go absolutely ape and they all loved it. One day I was teaching them and I told them I had a special trick. I did the Balducci levitation for them and they went ballistic. Afterwards, the teacher pulls me aside and sternly tells me I'm lucky she didn't throw me out of the classroom because one of the students who happened to be absent that day is, and I quote, anti-Wiccan and isn't allowed to view, quote, black magic. Had a helicopter mom who became one of the middle school's lunch monitors in order to help her kid make more friends. She would carry around candy and would only give it out to people that were friends of her child, literally denying others if she didn't know them. Ah yes, bribery to make friends. That's surely a good way to show your kids. You haven't seen anything until you've seen helicopter hockey parents. They don't only hover over their kids, they encourage horrible sportsmanship. A few years ago, when my goalie brother was playing Squirt AA, so about age 9 to 10, the opposing team equipped themselves with the age-old strategy of run the goalie. The coaches were in on this. The parents cheered bloodthirstily whenever these little jerks ran into my brother, and they kept this up more than they attempted to score. My brother had had enough. Poor kid snapped and walloped the next boy who skidded into his crease, the net area, which was totally justifiable by that point. This redneck-looking woman and her husband immediately got up, started screeching about their poor precious Joey, and get that goalie out of there, ref. Eventually, their whole cheering system was on their feet and yelling out obscene stuff about taking my brother out, to 10-year-olds. They all got escorted out by security. You cannot make this crap up. I have a cousin who lives in northern Michigan where youth hockey is a very big deal. My cousin was voted president of the league one year, and his first priority was to get the parents to only encourage good sportsmanship and friendly competition. He sent out over a dozen letters before the season even started to the parents of players throughout the league, stating that any parents seen shouting profanity, encouraging violence, or cheating, etc., would be permanently banned from all future games. The first round of the season starts, and it was a disaster. Parents were worse than usual, and several people were arrested at different games for fighting in the stands. Needless to say, the letters hadn't worked. So, my cousin decides to hold a meeting for players and coaches only to discuss the problem. After having the police forcibly vacate a few parents who didn't agree with the quote, players and coaches only aspect of the meeting, he asked the players what they wanted to do. Most of the players actually said they didn't want their parents to come to games. Most of them weren't trying to go pro. They just enjoyed playing hockey and their parents were ruining it for them. So, they took a vote at the meeting, and my cousin sent out one last letter that simply said parents/step-parents/foster parents/legal guardians, etc. were no longer allowed at official league games. If a parent was spotted, that team would forfeit the game. If they came a second time, that team forfeit the season. My cousin got some death threats, but nothing ever came of it. We decided to teach the Hunger Games in English last year. I had a few parents raise concerns because they had heard a few rumors, but it was nothing a quick conference and a little reassuring couldn't fix. Until Mrs. Bickerstaff happened. Now, Mrs. Bickerstaff had an inflated sense of self-importance to begin with. A housewife who, with complete seriousness, signs her emails Mrs. Nolanda Charlene Bickerstaff Esquire type of self-important. She not only pitched the biggest of fits about not allowing her son to read it, we offered an alternative to kids whose parents put their foot down and said no, but embarked on a 6-month campaign to get the school shut down unless we pulled the book from curriculum for everyone. She disenrolled her son, threatened to sue us for the cost of sending him to an expensive private school, and called every parent in the school to try to get them to do the same. When she didn't have any success with that, she went to the local news and told them what was going on. What resulted was a flattering news story that reported our high test scores and innovative approach to learning. We're a charter school. I should mention that she didn't read the book. Alrighty, I have a few. I worked at Whole Foods, and that is ground zero for lunatic parents. Number 1. There was the, quote, nutritionist and her mom that didn't want anything scanned because of the, quote, radiation. Number 2. One lady was going on and on about how her son was corn-free, egg-free, dairy-free, and soy-free because that's what her chiropractor told her to do. I wanted to apologize to that kid so bad. Number 3. When I worked at a cooking store, like Williams-Sonoma, I had a lady come in with her tween-age kids trying to find glass baking dishes because, quote, metal is bad for you. I suggested silicone, and she said that was worse. So I suggested parchment paper, but she already used that. I had a hard time holding back the massive smile when I told her that parchment has silicone in it. Every time she would go off on something, her kids would just roll their eyes. Didn't see it personally, but a few years ago there was an article in my local newspaper about a mother cleaning the vegetables she was cooking for her family in bleach. Didn't realize she was doing anything wrong until one of her children nearly died. I was not allowed to walk to school by myself even though it was literally 1 block away from my house because my mom said I would get forced upon. I was in junior high. I was never allowed to be unattended and was not allowed to go to friends' houses because my parents did not trust other parents. This extended all the way through high school until I started, quote, acting out, and they sent me to a lockdown mental health treatment facility. My childhood was painfully lonely, to say the least. I was volunteering for this thing 2 years ago where we helped freshmen haul their stuff, mostly tampons and televisions, into the dorms. One mom came at the end of the day and flipped her lid because her daughter's roommates already divided up the space, she was last to get there, and, oh yes, because her daughter didn't get the dorm with the swimming pool. Yes, her daughter had to change dorms because it was too dang hard to walk to the 2 buildings in a 50-foot radius to use the swimming pool. Her daughter was really chill though. Let's hope she stays that way. Pro tip for younger Redditors, if you're going to bring your parents with you into an admissions interview for a graduate program, it won't hurt your chances of getting in, but it will make you the laughingstock of the admissions department for the day. My brother is an admissions counselor at a major American university for one of their graduate schools. He told me that it's not an uncommon thing these days for helicopter parents to attend their children's admissions interviews with them. These are people in their 20s taking their parents with them to admissions interviews for graduate school. My jaw dropped when I heard this. We know them as umbrella parents because they cover you from everything. Poncho parents are more extreme. They're the parents that won't allow computer access without them right there, put huge restrictions on TV, G or PG, kids like 16, won't allow any video games, etc. Anyways, a Poncho parent I know managed to keep her 16-year-old son under the delusion that girls are gross and have cooties. My cousin has a helicopter mom, very controlling and dominant. Kate never got to think for herself, never had to learn discipline, financial or personal. She never had to. Her mom did it all for her. When Kate finally got into university and was away from her mother for the first time in her life, Kate went completely off the rails, since to all extents she was an 18-year-old with the maturity of an 8-year-old. She would struggle to fill out basic paperwork and forms for the class, since she'd had no experience of it. Worst of all was that she had no experience of the opposite sex, since she'd been sheltered all her life, and so she got taken advantage of frequently. What was even more stupid was that her mom still to this day does not see where she went wrong. She can't realize or admit that she weakened her child by removing life opportunities that strengthen a personality. In high school, I was friends with this girl we'll call Judy. Judy's mom was really strict/overprotective, and she could never go anywhere with us. And when she did, she'd inevitably end up grounded. She could never hang out, and she wasn't allowed to have friends over very often. Once when I was at her house, she got grounded for yelling at the dog. This led to a rebellion where Judy just stopped doing anything her mom told her. She started drinking heavily whenever she could, and she also smoked weed and did whatever pills or drugs people had. She always had to babysit her if she came out with us. This went on for a few months, and she met this guy. We'll call him Tom. He was about 25, and the kind of dude that's every parent's worst fear. Judy came from a good upper-middle-class family. Her dad was a dentist, that sort of thing. Tom was a 25-year-old burnout, and he was on house arrest when Judy met him. It was love at first sight for her, even though we all tried to talk her out of it. She started hanging out at Tom's house anytime she could. She'd skip school to go over there, sneak out of the house at night, that sort of thing. Well, it's no surprise what happened next. Judy got pregnant. She was 8 months along at our high school graduation and married Tom and had the baby shortly thereafter. Moral of the story, don't be a ridiculously strict parent because your child will rebel and bad things will happen. P.S. The same exact thing happened to Judy's sisters when they got older. Sad stuff. Edited to update. Judy and Tom stayed married for 10 plus years. I don't keep up with her, but from what I've heard, she went on to become a hairdresser. Tom stayed out of trouble and the kid turned out okay. He'll be 20 now. Dang, that makes me feel kinda old. I had a friend, Christina, whose mom was like that but more crazy. She had divorced parents who split custody pretty evenly. When she was with her dad, things were good, but when she was with her mother, if her mother ever saw her talking to a boy, even a male cashier at a store, she was grounded. She wasn't allowed to have friends over, and she wasn't allowed to go out anywhere besides school without her mom. Even when she was staying with her father, she would get called at least once an hour. Needless to say, she rebelled. Girl was a notorious nympho and a bit of an exhibitionist. She would flash cars, make out with anyone at the drop of a hat, and pleasure her boyfriends in public spaces. I refused to go to a movie theater with her because of how she would defile the place. Thankfully, she was smart enough to use protection and wasn't interested in drugs. Hilariously, when her mother met me, she decided on the spot that I wasn't allowed to be her friend because I was such a bad influence. Apart from my looks at the time, I was a poser punk/goth/whatever girl. I was perfect. I didn't do drugs, had decent grades, I was the only one of our friends involved with church and volunteering, and I was waiting for marriage before giving up my V card. This woman met me at a school event, and because I was wearing a hoodie during the summer, she accused me of being a cutter and drug dealer in front of my own mother, and then proceeded to shame my mother for allowing me to have a boyfriend. My mom even felt sorry for her daughter. Yeah, this goes without saying, but you can't prepare your child for the world if you're their only world. Kids are gonna screw up, act out, argue with you, all that stuff. That doesn't make them bad people and need a constant supervision. If anything, that makes it worse because you're judging their every move. Paranoia is contagious. Instead, learn to accommodate their needs, but talk with them about what they want. Now, if they want to do hard drugs, that's probably not gonna end well, but you can be a parent without being a bodyguard. I wish I had seen this thread earlier, but here goes. I'm a preschool teacher for ages 3 to 4 years old. One day, one of my girls, fake name Abby, is playing with, fake name, Becky's security blanket during free time. Becky wants her blanket back, so she asks Abby to get off. Abby refuses, so Becky pulls the blanket from under her and Abby cries. I tell Abby that she needs to listen to what Becky is saying and respect her friend's belongings. I also tell Becky that next time, instead of pulling the blanket from under Abby, she should just come tell a teacher. Maybe 5 minutes later, while I'm passing out snacks, Abby flips into a crazy rage and runs towards Becky, tackles her, and takes a huge bite out of her shoe. Plastic literally came off. I pull Abby off and try as calmly as I can to ask her why the heck she attacked Becky. Basically, it was revenge for getting her in trouble and taking the blanket away from her. Now, here's the mother part. I write an incident report telling both parents what happened, and, of course, I put Abby in the thinking chair for such an outrageous attack and call her mom, leaving a message and whatnot. But the next day, Abby's mom comes in and finds the child that got bitten, Becky, and tells her that if she hadn't yanked the blanket out from under Abby, maybe she wouldn't have attacked you. Of course, I asked the parent to leave immediately and to not speak to the children, that Abby was the one who attacked out of spite, and that her child's reaction was not an appropriate one that could be excused in my classroom. The mom got so mad at me for defending Becky, a 3-year-old, that she reported me to my supervisor for being unprofessional. I still have my job, but mom withdrew her child. But seriously? When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, linked at the top of the description. And if you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot, linked in the description too. Either way, thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.